Right, so I'll get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Ika Washington. I am the founder of Diversity Talk, and welcome to the Black Canadians in Cannabis event. Thank you, everyone, for your support and for registering and sharing as well. This event is very historic. It's very significant, as I was speaking to a lot of the speakers and moderators today. I started out in the cannabis space a couple of years ago, and it felt very isolated in terms of being a Black Canadian in the cannabis space. So it's so nice to now see that there's so much of us right now in the cannabis space where we can have these conversations and these healthy conversations about what is really going on in our experiences and how we can improve conditions and just being able to engage safely and navigate these spaces better. I just wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement, and I'll do it right now. So I'd like to take a moment to connect with the land that we're standing on right now. We respectfully acknowledge that we're standing on Indigenous lands and recognize the enduring presence of all the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and the responsibility we have to this land. So thank you. And I will continue with the session. So today's agenda has changed from those that have registered. We'll be starting off with our social equity panel, which will be followed, that will be led and moderated by Antoinette Gomez. And then we will also be leading into a conversation led by Vivian Wilson, who will be taking on the economic barriers as well as Black women and intersectionality. And I will take this time to introduce Antoinette Gomez, who will be leading the conversation on social equity. This is a conversation that will be focusing on addressing how injustices in terms of the cannabis space that make sometimes our communities unsafe when entering the cannabis industry, as well as the barriers that we face as Black Canadians entering the cannabis space. So, and how we can promote equity within that space as well. So I will ask Antoinette to turn on her camera and we can get started. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this amazing diversity event by Diversity Talks. I'm so happy to be here. We have a killer panel and on a really important conversation about social equity starting from. So there's a few more panelists coming up afterwards. So make sure you get comfortable, get a joint, get a glass of water, whatever you need to feel comfortable. And we're going to get started now. So a little bit about myself. Hi, guys. I'm Antoinette Gomez. I am the founder and CEO of Pleasure Peaks, a cannabinoid-based sexual health company. I have also founded the Cannabis Built by Blacks Expo that highlights Black leaders in the cannabis industry globally, and own Acapulco Gold, a cannabis jewelry company that hires BIPOC goldsmiths. So I'm incredibly happy to be here. I think when it comes to social equity, there's a lot of main points that I would love to talk about. But without further ado, I would love to introduce my panelists that will be speaking with us today. So I know that my bio is a mouthful, and these leaders are doing amazing things as well. So I would love for you guys to hear on what they're doing from their own words. So let's first, starting up, I would love to introduce Derek Dudley, our first panelist with us today. How are you doing, Derek?
I'm doing very well. I'm excellent. I'm optimistic and excited and hungry.
Me too, for sure. We have about 60 people showing up today. So let us know in the chat what city you guys are from. We would love to hear where you guys are tuning in from us. Derek, would you like to share with us a little bit about your bio and what you're doing in the space? You've done incredible things, and I'm so happy that you're here today.
Oh, well, thank you. Flattered, actually. I'm just a dude. I am a humble servant of mankind who just happens to attach himself to corporations on occasion. I am actually Floridian. I've been in Toronto for the GTA area for the last 10 years. I have been in the cannabis industry for the last 3 prior to joining the cannabis industry, medical sales representative. Eli Lilly, Bear Diabetes Care, GSK. Wow, yeah, I've got a roster. And what's interesting is that I've probably promoted products across several disease states. And interestingly enough, they all tie back to things that are governed by the endocannabinoid system. So my entry into cannabis was kind of seamless. And quite frankly, entering the industry as a medical sales rep has been a gateway to learning more about not only being more cognizant of what I put in my body, but it always comes back to advocacy and justice. I'm starting to become more aware of supply chains, food chains, sustainability, food deserts, food justice, and overall, cannabis has led me to want to lessen my dependency on institutions that were created through imperialism.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you to share that perspective with us today. Your career has been such an interesting viewpoint on this industry, especially when it comes to the medical side of things and how it overlaps with social equity.
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking forward to diving into that.
Yeah, let's do it. So next up, we have our next panelist, which is Justin Reed. How are you doing today, Justin? Justin, just share your audio with us and your video when you get the chance.
There we go.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hey, sorry about that.
Don't sweat it.
I'm good. How are you doing?
Wonderful. I'm so excited to be a part of this event. We have around 60 people watching us right now to talk about social equity. So Justin, you have a really unique story as well in the space. So can you give us a short little bio about what you're doing in the space currently?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in space, I guess the legal space for about 2 years now. I got my start at one of the pioneer stores in Brampton at Gonchic House. Started with an amazing team there, and then I made my way into Cambridge. I live in Guelph. I moved to Cambridge, or didn't move to Cambridge, but I got to work in Cambridge and helped open the first store in the Tri-City area. So first store before Guelph, Kitchener, Waterloo. It was an amazing store, great team there as well. And I'm currently now in Waterloo at Suite 7. I'm the product and training manager there. So it's my job to kind of educate people on the products and also help train the staff on just the proper etiquette, how to treat people, and give them a proper experience when they come in the store, which is great. We're kind of that middleman between OCS and people getting their products. So we kind of help eliminate that gamble when they're trying things out. So yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I can't wait to talk about that, and especially the OCS and its space within the industry today, especially when it comes to retail, affordability, and all of those other things. So happy you're here. Next up, I was honestly the most excited to meet this one, Omar Rodney. I am so happy that you're with us today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It's an exciting time that we're in, and it's amazing to be on with all of you here right now at this moment, groundbreaking moment, social shift moment. It's excellent. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just so in awe, and thank you for being here. I know that you've shared a lot of the questions that we're going to go deeper into, and I love that your perspective, being a Rastafarian as well, and sharing those roots, is a very interesting climate that we're in 2021 as Black and BIPOC people within the cannabis space. So I definitely see it's a beautiful culture shift, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. Could you share a little bit, like a bio as well, so the other people know what you're doing too?
Well, I'll just tell you my relationship with cannabis. I call it ganja. Was through Rastafari, and it was meeting people who are article people who were very connected with the earth and their culture, and with a movement that had to do with connecting spiritually, in not only an ancestral way but in a collective way, to be in touch with ourselves and to liberate ourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. That journey started when I was in my late teens, and it was a very fruitful and very rich journey, and shaped a lot of the way that I think in terms of social equity and justice and all these things. The first forebears of that influence would be my parents, and coming from a religious background, it was really the forerunner that made me gravitate towards Rastafari. In that, I was able to start, getting to learn about the plant from a different perspective than many are introduced to the plant these days. And there's a lot of history, a lot of legacy, a lot of practices, even ritual and discipline around using it at that time. So it was a great experience, and it led me further to learning how to grow, having an intimate relationship with the plant, learning how to process naturally, solventless, and connecting with people was probably the richest experience when it comes to ganja. And that's why people say people and plant, because the two are inseparable.
It definitely builds community 1,000%. We've seen that across the globe for sure. So I'm really excited to get into these really juicy questions about what social equity means for us Canadians here in cannabis. And, social equity is a term that's getting used for almost everything and anything these days. So, and it has been used in various different ways across the globe in legislation. So I'm curious for you as BIPOC individuals, what does social equity mean to you?
For
Well,
me,
I will.
Go ahead.
I'll just kick off and I'll be brief. Social equity, as it's entered the conversation, was originally a phrase to describe the hopes of Black persons and what they anticipated would be, in a nutshell, or in some ways, the replacement of what I would call 40 acres and a mule. Given the disproportionate effect of prohibition of Black people in the United States, the thought was that when social equity programs would be implemented within the realm of legalized cannabis, that there would be a prioritization of sorts to ensure that people who come from the community mostly adversely impacted by prohibition would have opportunities to catch up economically. That's social equity in a nutshell. As it pertains to Black Canada and cannabis in Canada, that's not a term that has really been utilized, studied, or discussed. And then lastly, I'll say that I am of the opinion that the very concept of asking for social equity kind of runs contradictory to how North American societies are taught to survive, which is rugged individualism and how it's manifested as crony capitalism. So I say all that to say social equity is more of a dream than an actual reality, given the actions of those who we are asking to give us equity, which is a share of their pie.
It's really interesting. We touched on a few really, really cool things. I think one of them being is that social equity really doesn't have much to do with licensing and hiring, but to repairing the injustices to those impacted communities that are behind economically. And that is a disservice to so many people of color that have been a part of, pre-legalization. So with that being said, thank you so much for sharing that component. But as well, I'm really excited. We are in Canada. There are some rumors that something could possibly change. But yet again, like you mentioned, it goes beyond licensing. It's really the repairment of the Black economy specifically. When I hosted the Cannabis Built by Blacks Expo last week, the most sobering quote that we shared was that Black culture is light years ahead of the Black economy. Black culture, you can't not see it at any point that you turn your head, but the Black economy is incredibly behind. So I think that we can move ahead with cannabis, and that would be a great example on how we can repair those damages. Omar, you also had something to say as well about what social equity meant to you. Would you like to share with us as well?
Well, I mean, Derek said a lot, and a lot of very important things that speak very true to how I feel about social equity when it comes to our people. one thing I will say though is we're in such an exciting time. We don't have time here, and it may not even be the appropriate place to go through all the details that I would have to give one-to-ones. We will have upcoming events where we can get into those. But this is a time where social equity for our people really means autonomy. It really means autonomy. It really means self-reliance. It really means that at this point. And it's been a struggle for many of us because, you know, we have to eat, we have to commerce, we have to do things in the mainframe of the conventional industry every day to live, I myself included. But the amount of mobilization that's been happening in the past year and a half is unprecedented, unprecedented. In my 47 years on this earth, I've never seen it. And it's so inspiring, it's so uplifting to see everything from young people, everyone from young people to, you know, elderly people getting involved and understanding that it's not about talking anymore, it's actually mobilizing and unifying. And the amount of organizations that have popped up that are now actually working together and creating ecosystems with one another to do for self is absolutely amazing. And that's what social equity means. You have to take it. You have to create it. You can't ask for it. You can't demand it. You have to demand it for self. And that's what's happening right now. So that's what social equity means to me.
That's amazing. And it totally brings me to my next question. But I wanted to say, Justin, did you want to add anything to that as well before we move on to the next question? What does social equity mean to you?
Yeah, just like I agree with both gentlemen, and definitely what Omar is saying. I feel that, yeah, social equity right now is taking these moments, you know, taking things into our own hands and really making something happen. You can't really ask or demand. No one's going to do it for you, basically. So I agree with that. I don't really have anything else to say on that.
This is great. I think one thing that we missed that I would love to highlight is like wraparound, like healthcare could really be seen as well within social equity. Like when we have, for example, veterans who have specific needs when it comes to their healthcare, we also have support systems for their families that are also impacted because, you know, for example, maybe that veteran can't drive. There are a lot of instances like that that we can also use within social equity if done appropriately, if, you know, if taken into consideration, if the task force really sees truly what this means for people of color and everything that they've gone for. So voice these opinions. They are listening. Trust me, they are here. But what I love that you guys have all touched on is that you don't really need social equity to do it either, right? Like there's so many ways that we can do it ourselves. And I feel like as Black people, as BIPOC people, I was speaking with an LP in Zimbabwe yesterday, and he was just like, you don't have to worry about us. We have the toughest skin. We're gonna come up top and don't even worry about it. So I find that with that being said, how do you think cannabis, how do you think that we as people can really collaborate to get ahead within the industry today?
I could start by just saying that Derek mentioned it earlier about the ecosystems. It's really it's merging or entities together within the ecosystem. That's what I would say.
And they're slowly popping up with these new networks, databases, accelerators for sure. Is there anything else that you guys have that would maybe help some of the audience if they not know of a few of those resources?
Well, absolutely. So I am a member of People's Alliance for Cannabis in Canada. And I tell you, it's like a hodgepodge cross section of persons from both the legacy market as well as the legalized market who all have a passion for the plant. I always mention that there's I would call a 365-degree view of cannabis because we all have our own expectations. And so one of the things I would always say is that even with your own expectations, get out of the silo, get out of the narrow window of your experience with cannabis. And specifically, I did a ton of networking and having conversations on LinkedIn. Very proactively. Anytime I saw anything related to the word plant-based, it's time to reach out. Clubhouse has been an amazing place to just listen in and hear the conversations, and you find out that there are other people who may not align with the specific path, but they all agree on the end, which is a better place collectively. And the reality is this, a lot of decisions and a lot of the news that you hear happened at conferences years ago that we weren't present at. So again, there's also a lot of education that has to take place with respect to those within our own communities that might have the finances to invest. There's going to need to be some outreach to that community so that they feel more confident in not only understanding the why they need to invest from a social justice standpoint, but also from an ROI standpoint, because the fact of the matter is, and Antoinette said it best, it was like a gut punch when you hear the Black culture is ahead of Black economics. And the good news is that we know we're trendsetters, and that's part of the message that we need to communicate to our own and remind them, hey, regardless of what you see in the news, we can do this. And so to answer Antoinette's question, you've got, I'm trying to think of the other minorities for medical marijuana. It's largely US based, but however, there are a few Canadian members. And then lastly, I'll say that allies are always welcome and appreciated. And we've noticed that not only in cannabis, but across the spectrum of every facet of how we live in North America. Because in spite of what we see in the news with division, the reality is most people that you will talk to, they want to do the right thing. So I would say get out of the comfort zone and do some outreach to some groups, and you'd be surprised at who you run into.
Amazing.
Much appreciated.
Justin, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, networking is definitely a huge thing. I know it's for me in my time and a lot of work that I've done, it's always been something that can cause a bit of anxiety. I won't lie, getting in a room full of people, a lot of times when that room full of people may not look like you, but I think it does go a long way to network. And Derek, you mentioned it, LinkedIn has been fantastic. I found a great community on there of people and allies that have been super supportive. Even things like Instagram, believe it or not, I've connected with a lot of African growers, that are doing some amazing things over there, and places that I wouldn't expect. I was ignorant to think that people are growing and doing these things, but there's been such a great response, like socializing and getting into some of these groups and networks, and just like I said, typing in cannabis and seeing what kind of comes up. You'd be surprised. Yeah.
For sure. Networking is absolutely king. I think you're only as valuable as your network majority of the time, unfortunately. I think that,
Much agreed.
Pardon?
I said much agreed.
I would agree. So like when I was the director of Canada at Women Grow, I was shocked on how women can just gather all this information and just talk and network, and we can get so much done so quickly, whether that's hiring, finding new leads. They're incredibly supportive, and we can use those type of strategies within our communities as well. So we're actually turning the Cannabis Built by Blacks Expo into a community, so stay tuned for that, because that is a global hub for Black leaders. But I'm just looking into the cute question and questions that people have been submitting to us on the Zoom. So if you have any questions, please let us know. And there are some that are actually incredible that I would love to discuss with you guys. So there's one that's a quick answer. Someone has asked us, can anyone speak to why not use the term marijuana instead of cannabis? And I can easily answer that in like 10 seconds, but the word marijuana is kind of been used as a predatory term for people of color, and specifically Latinos. That's why they put in J there to make it sound like Juana, to make it sound very Mexican. So cannabis has been used as a tool for violence amongst kind of collecting a lot of minorities, not just Blacks, but also Latinos and Asians together to incarcerate them. And you can go into some history, but that's the reason why we don't use the word marijuana, is because it's incredibly deeply rooted in racism. What we love to use is the word cannabis. A lot of people don't like to use weed because they think it's a very stoner-like culture, but it's definitely a lot less hurtful than racism. So I love cannabis. That's the scientific term. So I believe marijuana is incredibly outdated and too racist to use currently. Another question that is here is anyone doing a good job at a company that's setting an example within the industry? Which is a great question. Do you guys know any that are setting an amazing example for us? I would love to hear.
Unfortunately, no. And here's what I mean by that. So to kind of give a backup, specifically when social equity programs are used, it's usually some kind of preferred licensing award, whether it's cultivation or retail. Are there some governments or municipalities that have better equity programs than others? I point to the municipalities like Detroit, who have set out a clear path and said, look, you're not going to do business here until one of us does. And there are, and they had to do it because, quite frankly, the well-capitalized figures had access to data, and they knew which tracts of real estate to acquire long before legalization was announced. So the city of Detroit stepped up and said, you know what, we're going to give our city lands to equity applicants, and we're going to discount the applications, and we're going to discount the process, and we're going to provide support for Detroiters. Now, the question was, has a company done it? I have not seen a company yet that, and I don't want to, do the call out, but the fact of the matter is the social equity was used for press releases and as an opportunity to partner with equity applicants. And everything I've heard out of California points to a predatory agreement that results in the equity applicant turning over their ownership stake at some point and during the time, even to the legalese, absolving the larger entity of any legal risk. There is one company, I haven't seen the results of their actions, but I guess I'll go ahead and give them a shout out, Curio. I don't know if I define them exactly as one of the management service multi-state operators, because I think they're pretty local in scope, but their initiative is to franchise the business and provide a complete 100% ownership pathway to an equity applicant over the course of, I believe it's 3 years, which, if that is how it rolls out, that would be beautiful. That would be great. The challenge with that is that that plan also is contingent upon the ability of that applicant to receive a license within that jurisdiction that they're going to try to franchise and operate in. And unfortunately, a lot of these states have some limited licensing and closed processes. I'm going to say Oklahoma is wide open. They did a good job. Antoinette, go ahead and jump in, but it's—
I just wanted to hop in because I want to hear about solutions. We know that there's so much that aren't working.
I hear you. I so I wanted to answer the question. So the answer to your question is, anyone doing a good job? Anyone can set an example? No.
I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Omar. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I represent Organja Society, and I know I didn't say that in my bio. So Organja Society, we came together just under 3 years ago, and it was pre-legalization, pre-regulation. And we basically, from my experience in the so-called legacy market, what we like to call the craft market, I could see what was shaping up. We saw what was shaping up politically with many people who did understand that decriminalization would have been the better way to go. Corporations ruled, and of course, here we are today. The equity that we formed is being able to reach out to people throughout that market and people who formed organizations based on equity. And so the ecosystem, same principles. And it does exist. It's just that it's not being recognized by corporations. And so when we roll out, we're rolling out under autonomy, or rolling out under sovereignty. We're rolling out under organic and strategic partnerships that we've made with other Indigenous nations here in Canada as well too. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Again, there's a lot of details that could be broke, and here is probably not the forum for it, but there's a lot happening behind the scenes and outside of the corporate structure, or what the corporations might have wanted or the government may have wanted. And it can seamlessly work within the larger system, but it's going to take people with that vision and that courage to adopt it. And that's where the corporations come in. We're welcoming we're welcoming the corporate world to be a part of Organja. We're not shunning the corporate world, but it's those who have the courage to actually exact that social shift and that social change. And so we're going to put you to task. We're going to put you, let's talk more action. We're out here. We're here. And I know that right now they're trying to come up with solutions, because right now your company ain't SHIT. If it's not doing proper CSR out there, if it's not doing the work out there to serve some of the communities, and that's not just involved with ganja or cannabis, as many would call it. That's right across the board. So people all over are looking for grassroots people now, grassroots organizations, not to mention that many of the corporations, their objective in even getting involved with BIPOC community has to do with funding. Right now, there's a ton of money coming through the line. And let it be said, a lot of this funding that's coming through has to do with an international effort, not a national effort. We are coming to the close of the international decade of the African descent. And through the UN, there has been a lot of funding initiatives through that. The Canadian government is not only privy, but also involved in that. So a lot of this money that's coming through the pipeline, not just in the cannabis industry, throughout all industries for people of color, even through this time of COVID, a lot of it's being targeted by corporations because of the subsidy that they'll be able to use the money for. So we got to really understand what's really happening here. The people, if you're out there, you're really on the beat, people don't have trust in the corporate system anymore. It's basically falling. When I speak to people who've worked in the industry, they're so disheartened by what's happened. So it's not to be negative. I'm not looking at this as a negative thing whatsoever. It's time to put some money in your pocket, brothers and sisters. It's time to make some money. It's time to up ourselves together. This is our opportunity. This is the time, that this big reset, we should be leading this reset. And this is our time. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I love what you kind of mentioned there, was kind of a really beautiful gem, and how corporations kind of have this opportunity to do better. Like, it's not really just about hiring, but it's about making it a part of their corporate morality, their corporate structure, their corporate mandate. And that's how we can be truly inclusive. You kind of touched on that quickly, but I love where you were going with that, because we have these, and like majority of these corporations that are owned by people that don't look like us. And they say, we're trying, we're looking for them. We don't know them. We're not their friends. We help us. Like, we're trying. And I've just, I've been working with a few of them, and I've been noticing that, like, there's no such thing as trying. There's doing and not doing. And like you mentioned, you either make it a mandate and you say that, we've effed up. Our executive board holds X% of people of color, or X% of women, or X% of whatever, and we're trying to get to Y percentage within 5 years, within 10 years, within 15, but at least you're putting your money where your mouth is. And that's how you set an example to be an inclusive business, by making it a part of your mandate, saying that, don't worry, we're not racist, we just can't find them, is just not enough for us. It's not enough in 2021, unfortunately, to just not be racist. We need people to be anti-racist, because that's the type of world that we live in today, where racism is integrated within our society, within legislation, within the world that we operate in. So the only way how we can combat those things is if we make it a part of this new culture that we're trying to bring forward. So thanks for sharing that, because there's a lot of...
If I may add to that, just real quick. We've also had an opportunity being involved with many of our First Nation brothers and sisters here in Canada. We've been able to go on territory and see what sovereignty really looks like. We've had that opportunity, not just as Organja, but many people. And when you see what sovereignty looks like, and you see the change in the infrastructure that many of these nations were able to build within the past 3 to 4 years, just based on cannabis alone, you get an idea of what we would really need to really be where we want to be. So I just want to point that out to you, that there's a model of what that looks like. And I think we need to look at that model.
I just quickly add in on this discussion a little bit, since I guess I cover the retail space. You know, I deal with a lot of these corporate people on a daily, and I am in that an ecosystem, if you will. And you know what, I agree that on a large scale there isn't a lot being done, but I can't say that there's nothing being done at all, especially from, you know, my point of view. I've had some amazing conversations with some really great people, and I want to give a quick shout out to Lennox, my color. You know, both people of color who are in positions to make change, and especially my relationship with Lennox and stuff like that. They are a corporate giant, they are a little bit bigger, but you know, I'm starting to do things with Sweet 7 that are, you know, a little bit different than the standard corporate model, what you're allowed to do, because we're privately owned. So we're allowed to engage in the community a little bit differently. We don't have to follow a mandate. And because we have this connection with this vibe already, it's allowing us to do things differently, change the conversation a little bit. So I can't say what, you know, everything we're doing right now, like this is all just starting, but I do want it to be known that there are changes happening literally as we speak to change that narrative, that are getting into these spots. So it isn't just, you know, these corporate people who are like, yeah, we can't find these people. Because I do believe these conversations are starting to change now, at least from my perspective. Another quick shout out to Royal City, another great brand that's, I believe, more employee owned. But, you know, these conversations are being had. So just wanted to quickly mention that.
And I just wanted to also say, before, you know, it's overlooked, there are people out there doing some amazing things. I want to say, you know, thank you to Sister Rena Rampersad, who's bringing a lot of advocacy around inclusion in spaces, but also more so us doing what we need to do for ourselves. There's our great brother at African Canadian Cannabis Society, doing excellent work. He's done an amazing job in rallying the community together. And a number of other people out there, Afro-Cannabis sisters, yeah, all kind of people out there doing work, you know, and getting people together and getting the awareness out there. Sister Andrea McCord, Cloud and Roots, I believe. There's so many things out there that have been happening in the past year. So I just want to say that there's been a lot of movement, and I can't even mention all the people that I've come across out there that have been trying to mobilize the community in their own way as well.
Thanks for sharing that. That's another amazing resource. Rena and her amazing work with cannabis amnesty. It's also a question here about what about the reconciliation for Black Canadians who are jailed due to cannabis? These effects of this are generational, of course, and they're still happening, which is quite ridiculous. So with that being said, I would love for you to check out Cannabis Amnesty if that's something that you would love more information on. Other than that, going up to our next question, which is, what are your thoughts in regards to inclusion? Why is it important that minorities stick to their own? For example, Indigenous people stick with their own because of safety, same with brown people, Black people, and even the LGBT community. It seems that there are more of a divide when we're split. Would it be more impactful if the minorities stuck together? What are your thoughts on this?
I want to give some other people a chance.
I'll tackle this one briefly, and I will just simply say from it, and so here's my lens. Coming from where I was a Black American, and we are very regional in some of our behaviors, to a melting pot like Toronto, where instead of Black, you have Trinidadian, Jamaican, Congo, Rwanda, you have very individualized identities, and it's simply culture. When you immigrate and assimilate, people tend to gravitate to familiarity in neighborhoods. That being said, being overlooked is not an excuse. And I point to the Canadian banks as a group of people who said, we know how to deliver individualized services to each specific ethnic community. And they do that in their hiring as well as their marketing messages. So every community that was mentioned, they have the Canadian banks have a specific message and agenda for each one of those communities. And so, yeah, in theory, the various ethnicities, minorities, I hate using the term minority, but the different minority groups in theory, it does sound like a good idea and perfect, but the natural tendency is to kind of move along cultural lines. And just to make it clear, Black people aren't even a monolith in of itself. So we even have some different ways and moves that we do individually in our own kind of little pockets. That being said, there's always a common denominator. So you are right. But that being said, the entities that we have been asking, or we would have thought would have granted quote unquote equity and opportunity, they know how to do it if they wanted to do it. And lastly, I will point to an example. There was a pharmaceutical company that I was working for, and I knew for a fact that Black women suffer from depression. And I asked the marketing team, why aren't more Black women featured in promotions for this antidepressant? And he told me flat out, we go where the money is. So right now, all of our directed and targeted branding goes to 40-year-old Caucasian women. When we launch our lupus medication, we know that disproportionately affects Black women, then you'll see more Black people in the imaging. Now, you cross that over to every investor slide deck from the licensed producers that was going out. None of them mentioned anything other than the same specific high value target. So that being said, yeah, it would be great if all of the minorities worked together. But the fact of the matter is, if any of us mattered to those who are making the business decisions, then they would have found a way to reach us. So that's why I'm always kind of saying there is a for us, by us opportunity within the structure of being overlooked.
Much agreed. I very much agree, and I'm going to point back to what you said originally about the ecosystem. When you create the structure, we're all programmed differently. We all think differently. We have different influences, different roads and paths we walk. Once you create a structure, you create a system that people integrate into, then the system sets the course. So again, it goes back to setting the system. If you leave it up to people, people find all kinds of excuses. They'll watch their differences. They'll have 3 differences and 10 similarities, and they'll watch the differences more than the similarities. It's just the nature. But when you have the system there and you have it in a place that's welcoming, accessible for all so-called minorities, then you have a structure in place, and you have something to create sustainability around it.
Justin, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I agree with whatever you're saying. I do think it's important to obviously support each other and have that sort of ecosystem, but I also do think it's a very good thing to kind of diversify, you know, definitely within our community too. So yeah.
What I will say, which is my 2 cents, is I think that the BIPOC term has really taken away from the Black community. So I find that, and like that's, and taken away from so many people who exist within that BIPOC. It means so much that it means so little now. So I find that everybody who is in that is now making their own titles and own networks of support, because we find that there's too many voices to actually work towards these specific things, right? So, and I think that's really important, because all of these communities, Black, Asian, Latinos, LGBTQ, they all have specific issues that we're trying to overcome, right? There's so many different systemic barriers for us, but it's different for each community. And I think that they all have value in sharing those differences. So I think having those support systems are incredibly beneficial for any community, to have those specific communities of healing, of understanding and support. So that's what I would love to add with my 2 cents. We are coming up close to the end. So I do want to let you guys know, do you have any questions for us? We're going to be opening up for some Q&As. But what I would love to ask from our audience, I'm also noticing some questions in the Q&As, but they're more so on business. I feel like that would be best for like possibly the next panel. So I do want to keep on topic of social equity. So let me just look through these Q&As quickly. So how can Black Canadians and Americans better cooperate to create a Canadian market where is trade between 2 North American communities? So I will share that I became the director of Canada at 4MM. I don't know if you heard that, Derek. We announced it today, which is wonderful. So we're really looking at building those chapters across Canada so we can have those support networks for minorities. So look into that if something that you're interested in. Looking for more. So yeah, these are more business. Since the Black are looking for employees. So SESS Holding is a truly outstanding company reaching out to my BIPOC community. We're looking for employees who have a passion located in Mississauga. One thing that I love that Justin Reed has mentioned, he's having conversations with people about creating these opportunities for people of color, like I am as well. But yet again, I don't care much about these conversations until they actually get on paper into a mandate on something. So thanks so much for sharing, and let's just keep sharing this information as it comes out. Would you guys have any thoughts on if there is an advantage to joining a cannabis sales agency? I've been rejected by almost every LP. Now I'm negotiating a position with cannabis sales agencies, and thought of handling various brands just seems unbelievable. So when it comes to that, like when it comes to building a brand within the cannabis industry, I find that it's actually easier than ever before, because with the pandemic, so many of these public companies have, you know, acquired an incredible amount of debt and had to lay off so many people that they're looking for other means of, you know, getting funding. And they're doing that now by white labeling for these smaller brands. I'm having conversations with a few of them to create these little networks networks have these opportunities for BIPOC individuals. So look out for that. But I wouldn't be going to LPs specifically, but those specific white labeling LPs. Sales agencies are great, but I find that there is a tax on top of that. Do you guys have anything else you would love to add to that question? It has changed.
Yeah, there are actually two that I wanted to answer, the American Canada one, as well as so disclaimer, I was with Tilray for 3 years as a medical sales rep. I'm currently with CanTrust, in addition to an amazing project that we're working on the sideline through KJ Markets. The interesting thing about the licensed producers, particularly in the retail side of the business, is that they have gone largely the beverage route, meaning the majors have signed on with distributors, and the traditional beverage distribution houses have spun off cannabis specific decisions. So the idea is that rather than have me as a licensed producer pay a higher salary for one sales rep, they turn the brand over to an agency, and the agency rep carries multiple brands and has to triage and make decisions about how they're going to represent each respective brand. Again, there are some pluses for being able to work with one specific LP. That being said, the model that the larger ones have shifted to is through distribution. So what you end up is, if you have had some opportunities getting to the licensed producers on the retail side, it is because in their view, there is a specific, based on the current framework, and I want to make sure this point is understood, that right now the industry is ever shifting, ever changing, and everything's a moving target. That being said, based on the current way supply chain, the companies have said, you know what, we want to go cheaper, give it to the agency, and more importantly, we need people who know exactly how to get a product moved within the retail market. Like, for example, the OCS is delisting, meaning you can't just throw a product up and it gets sold. They've had too many products sitting on the shelf. So what they want now is almost a foreknowledge that if they bring a product in, that on the other end, that there's a letter of intent from the retailer to pick this product up. So that being said, if you have an opportunity to gain this experience through an agency and then return and become a licensed producer leader at a later date, take that opportunity.
Okay. Did anyone else want to add to that? I know Ika is going to be joining us quickly, very shortly.
I wanted to quickly mention that's it's definitely I know not always ideal for people to be able to work in the retail space, especially on the floor, and have to I guess deal with customers one-on-one. But I believe that that is a good place to start to make some sort of change as well. We're having all this conversation about what you can do here and there, but like, I do think it's important to have people in these positions as well. You know what I'm saying? If you're walking to any of these retail stores, how often are you seeing anybody on the floor who looks like you? How often are you seeing somebody who's behind the counter looks like you? Who's in that management? Who's in that ownership? I know I talk about having these conversations, but there is action behind these conversations. It's not just we talk about it and it goes away. Every day that I'm going to work, change is happening and on the ground floor. I'm not seeing others who look like me. I've been in the industry for 2 years and I've seen one marketing team that's all Black, or from the BIPOC community in any capacity. But it does take people to go and fill these roles as well. It's not just going to happen by itself. So I do think it's an important thing that maybe if you do want to get into an LP, you can't start from working for a a marketing company, but who's to say that you can't come work on the floor for 6 to 8 months and you get to meet these LP reps who are there and get to build that relationship, right? It goes back to that idea of networking. Like how important is it to you, Muhammad Ali has that quote, and like, I'm not literally quoting it word for word, but it, champions have the skill and the will to be great, but your will must exceed your skill. And how bad do you want it? How bad do you want to be in these positions? I've been in here for 2 years, being on the floor, doing basic stuff. And it's not even basic. You get to meet amazing people. You get to make tons of change that is, beyond comprehension. You can't really measure that, but it has opened doors and put me in places to do stuff. So, I know this is new and fresh, but let's have this conversation, 6 to 8 months from now. Like I said, the cannabis industry is always changing. So let's come back to this a year from now. We'll see where it is. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you guys for such an amazing panel. I knew when I was putting you guys together that it was gonna turn out something like this. It actually turned out better. So thank you so much. I think that this conversation of social equity, and I think opening it up in terms of understanding what social equity actually means, is actually very different to a lot of people. So having a conversation of transparency when you're talking about social equity and asking others respectfully, of course, what does it mean to you and how can you help is a big question. It's about shifting the platform and having other individuals have the voice to speak, and giving them that platform to speak is what I'm trying to create and what I'm trying to work with partners and people like yourselves to create. So I thank you guys so much for your time. And I think this is a great segue into looking into the economic barriers that we face as Black Canadians. And I guess another thing to kind of rewind is the reason why I focus on Black Canadians is because our space in terms of Blackness is being diluted when we talk about Blacks in cannabis. And I really want to focus on the identity of what it means to be Black and Canadian. So Black is a social cultural tag. It describes my ethnicity. It describes a lot of our ethnicities. It describes our culture in terms of how we navigate our spaces. But our Canadianness is our nationality. That is something that is a passport. That is something that maybe you were born here. And that's what it means. When you put both of them together, it's a unique experience. It's different than being a Black American. I can go further into understanding my identity as a Black Afro-Jamaican Canadian. You know what I mean? Like, you can just keep going down, and that's what it means in terms of this cultural mosaic. So I'm giving the opportunity to Black Canadians specifically, whether it's a passport, whether it's your birthright, to discuss these conversations. So I thank you very much, Antoinette, Derek, Justin, and also Omar, for these conversations. And I look forward to continuing these conversations, like you said, Justin, the next 6 to 8 months, to see what changes has actually been made. How have you also been a part of this change and be a catalyst and an agent of change in this space? So I thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce our next panel. I'd like to introduce Vivian Wilson, which many of you should know if you don't already know, who has been groundbreaking, and I'll have her introduce herself because she'll do it much better than I am. But this conversation on the economic barriers, and we have some great Black Canadians, those have identified as Black Canadians that have been in the cannabis space, who have been able to access and do things in this space as trailblazers. And I want to give them the opportunity to speak about what economic barriers have you faced? What advice would you give others that are trying to enter the space? How's your experience been different, and has your Blackness or your identity played a part in the barriers that you face? And how can we move forward in terms of forward thinking about how can we actually put resources and be there for others who want to enter the space? So Vivian, I'll hand it off to you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity and bringing this panel together. I think it's an excellent panel, excellent work, and I think this will help a lot of people who are interested in getting into the industry and don't know where to start, especially from a financial perspective. So my name is Vivian Wilson, the founder of Greenport, one of the first Black female-owned cannabis retail stores across Canada. We're also federally licensed to sell cannabis as well, import, export, and we're expanding and building as we try to navigate this cannabis space here in Canada. Now, I'm honored to be a part of this panel and moderating this discussion with some very talented entrepreneurs within the cannabis industry here in Canada. They are all leaders within their own respective spaces. And without further ado, I introduce you to the panel. We have Drew, Ashley, and Keenan, and I'll have each of the panel members introduce themselves. We can start with Drew Henson.
Hi, thank you very much and welcome. I appreciate being here and getting a chance to talk to everybody. I'm Drew Henson, the founder and CEO of Toki Technologies Limited. We're a cannabis consumption company, technology company. We are aiming to be the Dyson of the industry and we're well on our way. We've got our first set of technology where we have the first wireless charging 510 compatible vape device, and we're looking forward to building out some more devices in the near future. Looking forward to a great chat. Thank you.
Ashley, you're next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Athel. I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you, Vivian, for moderating, but as well, thank you, Ika and Diversity Talks for allowing this conversation to happen, which is absolutely needed. So my name is Ashley Athel. I'm CEO and co-founder of Harvester Cannabis. We are licensed for microcultivation and processing, and we were licensed October 9th, 2020. Our production site is located on 10 acres of land, and we're located in Durham, Ontario. We're proud and we're very much humbled to be Canada's first fully Black-owned, federally licensed cultivation and processing facility.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ashley, and congrats, of course. So as you can see, we went from Drew, who is, on the technical side for accessories within cannabis, to Ashley, who's in the cultivation processing realm, and now two very unique and distinguished, I would say, industries within the cannabis space. And on to Keenan.
Yeah, nice to meet everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm the CEO and founder of Token Naturals, which is right now, we're hoping this month to be the, right after Ashley, the next LP in the cannabis space. So we're focusing on manufacturing, so we don't do any growing. We just create products for white label and partners. And then our background is we were in the cocktail space before that, so we own a bitters company. Sorry, my dogs are going nuts. And then we also own 7 dispensaries that we built out and sold. So that's our background in this space. We've been doing it for about 7 years now.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Keenan. And that's huge. Processing is one of the hardest licenses to get federally. So congrats, Keenan, on being able to become one of the very few companies who are able to get that license. And on to Barrington.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Barrington Miller. I'm the Director of Issuer Engagement at the Canadian Securities Exchange. We have been involved in the cannabis space pretty much since day one as providing a means for access to public capital. In particular, we have accepted companies that are listed not only in Canada, but also in the United States and all around the world. So we've had a very unique position and front row seat in watching this industry and helping it grow.
Thanks so much, Barrington. And I'm so glad to also have Barrington in the loop in this conversation, because if you've been following the industry, then you know that a lot of the money that has been raised by these cannabis companies have been raised because they've gone onto the stock market. And so he can definitely lend us or share some knowledge on how we can do that, or any of you who are interested can also, follow that process as well. So without further ado, I'd like to jump into the questions that we have, that I have for the panel. So the first question I'd like to start with is, based on your experiences, what would you say are some of the main economic barriers that you have experienced with getting your companies up and running, if any?
I guess I'll kind of take this one on. I think there are couple of general barriers that come to mind, which includes obviously access to funding. The fact that it's very considerably high startup costs when it comes to either building out a GMP certified facility or just like Drew, building out products. I think it's a very extremely high capital cost. And as well, I've been in this industry for a while. We're talking about 2012. This was before legalization even came into fold. But during those times, and even now, what we do see is a weak support system that doesn't offer many solutions for the BIPOC community. So those are some of the economic barriers that I have faced. On top of it, yes, being a Black woman who's female and coming from the legacy market, that's a couple of barriers in itself, but I utilize that as motivation rather than something that will deter me and discourage me from joining this industry.
Anyone can jump in, Keenan or Drew.
I'll run on with that. I've had kind of a similar situation. So Toki is not the first company I've created. It's owned by my product design studio, which is the parent company. And we've also created another tech startup called Seam Technic, where we have wearable technology. And just a quick story on how Toki came to be is I saw the writing on the wall if I kept working away at a company where the sales pitch was, do you feel safe? And ultimately, I knew that if I burned the last amount of cash I would have would be in problems. So for me, it was a matter of having enough money to get the idea off the ground, to prove it, to get to the next stage. And access to capital that Ashley talked about was absolutely one. But one of the problems I ran into is as I went to about 60 angel investor meetings was believability. And if I come down to what it was about, probably racism, because at the end of the day, I would be in meetings with people telling me I'm a trained professional in creating electronics, that creating electronics is too hard. I don't think you should do that. And I'm like, what ground do you have to stand on to make this comment other than the fact that you think you have $10,000 to put into a company where you now feel like you're an initial investor in Facebook and swinging around in my face like that? And so believability is I could come wearing the best suit and spoke the most proper articulate English, but they still told me they knew better than I did in my area of expertise. And so believability was a barrier for me on an economic side. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo Drew and Ashley's points with kind of the economic barriers of raising capital and kind of getting in front of the investor community. So our company, it took a long time. Like it took 4 years to raise it. We raised $4.5 million, and it was, I think, about 70% now is owned by like BIPOC and females. But yeah, you definitely have to really kind of take a different path being a person of color when it comes to raising capital. You've got to go out to networks. You're not going to be able to tap into your generational wealth. You have to go outside of your kind of immediate community to get into the capital. So yeah, we went through multiple rounds of financing, did it kind of slow and steady. But what we had to do is we had to always have proof points, because they weren't just going to be like, oh yeah, no, I trust Keenan and his background. Even though I come from a finance background, I have my master's and my undergrad and the whole shebang. But at the end of the day, it's like you got to really prove yourself twice, which made our company even leaner and stronger as we were going. But we started with a bitters company to prove we could execute consumer packaged goods. And then that became a really successful company in terms of growth and international export. Then we did the retail shops to show that we could find and identify opportunity. And we had to do that and sell them and continue to hustle as opposed to just raising a big lump sum of capital to sit on and execute. So yeah, we had to definitely take a more of a windy path to get to the same point as other LPs that are went through a very similar story as us.
So I can definitely confirm all your varied experiences there with raising capital. I chose to do this independently for obvious reasons, because I didn't want to have to prove that I knew what I was doing to anyone, other than for me to just do it and I be the proof. And it became easier for me to actually put out a more authentic company, a more authentic experience that resonates more so with me and people from our community. So that was really a turning point, I think, for me getting into the industry, was actually financing it for myself. Now, Barrington, you've seen a lot of these LPs raise money through the through the stock market. Do you see any differences with any Black-owned or BIPOC-owned companies and how their experience is trying to raise public capital, or do you find that it's a similar experience?
Unfortunately, I'm not seeing a lot of BIPOC companies or companies that have that in the leadership position, and it's not just within the cannabis sector. The Canadian Securities Exchange has been around for about 16 or 17 years, and I think I can count on less than 3 fingers companies that are led or have somebody in the position of, and that's disappointing. As far as the entrepreneurial relation that we have as an exchange, we had to prove ourselves, and we had some really lean times, and we stayed on the path, and that's what it's about. We had our foundation, we knew what we believed in, and we took the risk, and the risk has been paying off. But we're out here, and that's what we're doing. We're supporting entrepreneurs regardless of race, color, creed, anything like that, and we continue to move on. But unfortunately, there is still a lot more to cover.
Well, thanks for that, Barrington. So my follow-up question to the panel is, do you think that there are limited opportunities? We know we have the stock exchange to raise private capital. You've mentioned angel investors, and there's family and friends or what have you. But do you find that there are limited opportunities for Black or Black people or people within the BIPOC community to actually raise capital, regardless of how skilled and talented and experienced that you are?
Sorry. I'm going to jump in. Sorry. This goes to the story that we have all heard, that you're going to have to work twice as hard, start 2 feet further back just to get to that same place. The bottom line is we have to do more just to get on an equal footing, and things like this, having conversations and keep pushing, is what's going to make that change. And the change is slow, but the change is happening. Just think back 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This wasn't an industry. This didn't exist and it didn't exist the way that it does now, where companies can list and go public and access public capital. It's amazing, and it's only going to keep getting better, but we can't stop fighting. We can't stop pushing.
Yeah, I echo those sentiments from Barrington that, we do have to work twice as hard. 90% of the time we're overlooked and overqualified. So how frustrating can that be for anybody who's trying to break into this industry? But in the fact that we also have to deal with those systematic barriers and as well structural barriers. Whether you're going with investors, there could be some perception barriers of what a leader looks like, who a leader should be. And on top of it, just the structural and systematic barriers, let's say if you're going to be going through a banking institution. So these are different levels that we all have to take into consideration in whatever channel we are going to actually raise money. And it's hard. It's hard on the psyche. It's hard on the business. But those individuals who are dedicated and ready to put their feet into the ground can be successful. You just have to be diligent, and you also have to be dedicated to your art and what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And to build up that, I think something that's kind of missing in our community is like the mentorship of raising capital. So for me, as a Black man looking to go and learn how to do it, it's one of those things you learn by trial by fire. Like it's hard to read a book on it. So, but me, like there's not someone who's kind of gone ahead of me that I was able to tap into that looked like me. But the nice thing and the kind of more positive thing is like, I look to the Ashleys and the Drews of the world, and like kind of everyone who's going through it at the same time as me to, get that support and get that mentorship. And we work as a group and we connect over different means. But I think to kind of the point made before, is it's going to be slow, but I think we can be the kind of those mentors to the next generation. Be like, hey, we stumbled here, but you know, Drew's wicked at tech, or Ashley's got all these connections here. Go talk to them. Go talk to Keenan. And I think these kind of panels are what's really important to show the next generation, like, hey, there's people who have done it. You're gonna have to work hard. It's not gonna be a cakewalk, but it's doable.
Yeah. Agreed.
Drew, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think Keenan touched on a lot of good points that I've kind of just been jotting down here and stacking up. But I think on his most recent one of working together, that's how I actually met Keenan. So we met because he put out a blast into the matrix of the world that said, hey, Black Canadians who are in cannabis, do you want to get on a call? And that was last year, you know, and since then we've had the opportunity to discuss a couple of things and send them back and forth. But I think if we're looking for solutions out of this conversation, you know, really being there to have those conversations together, like being on this panel, are of course of the utmost importance. But the one that I wanted to kind of wind it back to, I think one of the most important things that was said today is the words generational wealth that Keenan said earlier. I think one of the best solutions for Black people to get out of economic barriers is if our children understand the terms generational wealth. Because if I was to ask a lot of Black kids today, if that is even in their lexicon, they would be like, what are you talking about? But there are white kids growing up wanting to be Mark Cuban, wanting to be this. And there's kids wanting to grow up and be Michael Jordan, of course. But a lot of them are still thinking about it from the basketball perspective and not from the perspective of creating generational wealth for their family. And the reason this is a problem is because as I go to find a business partner, I need people who have the same size dream that I have. I need people that have the same size ability to reach as I have. And only people that have those huge dreams that are Black people, I mean, not only, but it'll really help if that's what you're striving for to get there because you're mindful of it. And so I think a couple of things like that, just helping change the size of the prize in our next generation will really help.
I'm going to jump in. Drew, you made a really, really good point. And it starts at a young age, and it starts with teaching finances. It starts with allocation of money. It starts with investing and what it means to invest, and explaining and having these discussions in grade 1, grade 2. Don't ask for toys, or don't give toys. Give a stock certificate and explain it. No, I'm serious. There was that example of there was a child who received a $6 GameStop stock.
That was awesome.
Yeah, and we all know what happened. And yeah, it's not going to happen every time. But it's things like that where we're changing it. Yeah. Another thing that we tend to do at the CSE is networking and introductions. So if there's somebody you want to meet, and whether they're in your space or whatever it is, we encourage discussion, like, hey, send me a message, and we do introductions. And it's things like that. It's not, you know, it's not just by chance. These things are happening, and connections and networking. I encourage everybody in the audience, get out and network, talk. Get out there, see what's going on. And that's what we try and do. We are the Exchange for Entrepreneurs.
I do want to just quickly add a short strategy that my mom did for me when I was very young, if you don't mind.
Of course.
No.
When I first started working, I was at McDonald's, okay? And my mother, even though I was bringing in probably like, what, $200 checks, she would always be like, where's my rent? And I would be like, what are you talking about? I need Jordans, I need this, I need this. And then she'd be like, give me my rent.
Yeah.
And I gave her the rent because it's not like I couldn't, but she saved it for my whole entire time that I was working, from McDonald's until I hit 27. Even if I didn't live with her, where's my rent? And she kept it. And then she gave it to me so I could put down on a house.
Wow,
so it's
awesome.
small things that could really change the trajectory of a child and their life. So even the smallest amount can really make a big change. And I know I'm talking to the moms and dads out there. don't, just try to implement different strategies for your children so that they can build that understanding of what finance is. And, that's just maybe something that you could implement and put in your back pocket. And remember to say, where's my rent?
I think that's amazing. I will definitely agree with the idea of networking. That's how I met Ashley even before I got licensed, was just, I literally Googled Black women in cannabis. And she was one of the people that popped up. And I reached out to her, I don't know, it's like almost 2 years ago now. And that's how I met her and knew what they were doing, and was always, keeping an eye out on when is, her company going to come and up and running, and how can we support each other? So that's huge. And I definitely can echo what you said about your mother. My mother, when I first started working, which was probably babysitting or at Zellers, my money went into mutual funds by the time I was 15, 16 years old. And I actually cashed out the mutual funds and bought my first house. And so it's these, like you said, it's these small things, you know what I mean? Now, my mother's not financially savvy or investor savvy, but she still supported the little things that I was doing. And even when I stopped putting money into that account, she still kept maintaining it for me. And I actually was able to pull that account for, when I needed it. So those are small things that, even if we don't have this generational wealth, these are the small little tokens of opportunity that we can use to teach each other to start building. So that's huge. Thank you so much. I think that was a really thoughtful panel discussion. So I just want to go into the next question that I have for the panel is that, for me, I watch, and I'm sure many of you watch, as cannabis companies are losing billions of dollars. Some of them, $800 million have been lost in a quarter. Now, what do you think is contributing to this type of significant financial loss? I mean, I don't know about many of you, but it's kind of strange to hear that people are losing this much money selling weed. How is this possible? Barrington.
I want to jump all over that. Let's go back a little further. Let's go back to when they were raising the money and how money was being given to them and how overinflated or overvalued it was. It's when you're starting from scratch, it's literally, how much is this worth? Well, it's worth what somebody will pay for it. That's a simple question. And if people are going to throw ridiculous amounts of money.
Please say that again. Sorry, I just love that line.
Oh, what is the value of something? What is something worth?
Yes.
It is worth what somebody is willing to pay for it. And so if somebody is willing to pay and, have stocks at $100 a share or $200 a share without any real business behind it, besides four walls and a growing capacity of 50,000 square feet, then that's what it's worth. And as the market matures, as time goes on, and you have to act like a real company, it's like, okay, maybe it's not $100 a share. Maybe it's more like 25. Maybe it's more like 10. Maybe it has to change and be a real business. This is occurring at the same time while there's economic forces around it that's changing. So it's not just the industry itself, it's also the economy. Then let's throw in a global pandemic. There's so many things. So yeah, a company losing or an industry losing that much money. Well, if you were at, $1 billion when you shouldn't have been, and you lose 800 million, you're still to the good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what it's actually a good sign when you see the ups and downs and it's still going up over the long course, because it's showing the maturation of the industry. So right now we're finding out what it's really worth.
Yeah. I mean, to echo that, people scaled bad businesses at the end of the day. They thought we just need to grow plants and people are going to smoke plants. They didn't take into consideration how many genetics they brought into the company. They didn't take into consideration how they're going to be able to pivot if they need to. So now maybe we're talking about a major LP that only has like 12 genetics in its pocket. Well, if people don't like smoking that specific indica, you're screwed. And so, you know, there was just so many things that were done poorly. And just continue to be scaled this day out of greed, to be honest, it feels like to me.
If they're handing out cookies, they're going to take the cookies every single time.
Yeah.
Every single time. And you know, that's what was getting money. You're going to build a 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 growing facility. Then it was vertical integration. We're going to own the process from seed to sale. We own it. It's all under our umbrella. Well, what if you suck at distribution? What if, like, you're not the best at it? So do you really want that under your umbrella, or do you want to go to the best place that can distribute it, or the best packager, or the best labeler, or the best grower? It's changing. And so we expect to see it, and it's going to continue to change. And like you said, people's flavor profiles, we were talking about flower. We haven't discussed edibles. We haven't discussed beverages. We haven't discussed growing seasons, and never mind our neighbors to the south and the federal illegality of it. There's so many things that are affecting this industry. All right, I'll stop talking.
Sorry. Ashley or Keenan, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I can go after.
Oh, yeah, just to kind of add to those sentiments, yeah, definitely what's happening in the US and COVID with grow operations shutting down internationally. But if you're looking at what's happening in Canada, like there's also the competition of the gray market, which essentially provides more selection, more product selection, and in some people's eyes, better quality because of the genetic selection. And, you know, those large organizations that are cultivating, they're monocropping these massive amounts of cannabis and what these guys mentioned under one strain, and think that everybody's going to be okay with just one strain, and not actually taking into consideration everybody's endocannabinoid system is different and everybody likes a different flavor, right? And so this is something that unfortunately the expectations have fallen short based on projections, but all of these things essentially just fold into why it is best to slowly and gradually grow your business so you can hit those benchmarks and markers.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think another thing is this, where it kind of being a person of color and not having access to the capital really kind of strengthened the core business of kind of the BIPOC community, because we didn't have long, big runways. So like, you know, thanks to the big guys who went out there and tossed all this money in the industry and figured out what didn't work and lost a ton because, you know, they went in the wrong direction. And the reason our business like Token Naturals even exists was because we were originally trying to create a beverage, and we were calling around and being like, hey, who will manufacture a beverage for us? And we realized so this was like 2014, 2015, 16, people were just hanging up and saying, no, like we're going to be vertically integrated. There's not going to be no room for you. And we're like, well, that looks like a business opportunity. Let's focus on just manufacturing. So we spun the business and from the beverage idea to, okay, let's do manufacturing for other people. So that's where really our business laser focused into. And that was because while we were trying to raise capital, people were slamming the doors on us. And we're like, hey, we actually got to build a business first, and then we can kind of execute. Like I don't have a 2-year runway. I've got a 4-month runway. And if I run out of money, I don't really have the confidence that I'm just going to be able to pick up the phone and call Uncle Moneybags to toss more cash in here. I've got to actually have a system in place of balancing debt, equity. I got to take revenue from somewhere else. So I think it was a really interesting being at the forefront of an industry, watching that unfold and saying, okay, I've got some opportunity to carve my own path here, and it made our business stronger. If you would have given me $5 million in 2016, we probably would have blown it. But let's be honest, we were learning like everyone else. There's a lot of things that had to be sorted out.
All great points. I just want to follow up though, but do you think that these, dramatic losses do make it harder for Black entrepreneurs such as yourself to now gain access to capital? Because, you know, the concept, there's already so much doubt in whether or not you can make it work. And we're seeing that they can't make it work. And most of these companies are owned and operated by white men. We're looking at over 80%. Does that make it even harder now for anyone looking to get into the industry from the Black or BIPOC community to raise capital?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. Yes, and for one direct reason and one indirect reason. So when Canopy Growth and all of these companies screwed up Royal, Canopy Growth, as everybody knows, dragged everybody else down in the stock market. So I saw an interesting post on LinkedIn that was basically like, I can't talk to somebody about cannabis and them not tell me their opinion on the stock market in cannabis. And so just kind of from this indirect perspective, it's created this sentiment of investing in cannabis might be risky in an indirect nature because of its performance and direction on the stock market. And then in the direct manner, it's obviously created the same sentiments in people. And so I think, you know, whereas you could maybe have gotten away with in a different industry selling the idea and maybe having a prototype, to Keenan's point, if you want real money in this industry and you look like us, you're probably going to have to come with a balance sheet that's showing some revenue numbers in order to validate, or at least to be honest, have the ground you want to stand on to not be abused in that negotiation cycle, because that's probably what they're going to be looking to do otherwise.
Yeah, it's going to be harder, but at the same time, the investors you're taking now, it's smarter money. People, you can't just log into a room and say, I have a cannabis company that has this square footage and this is a fraction of, you know, the big LP, and that's why I'm worth this fraction of their valuation. That doesn't exist anymore. It's now sound business acumen and sound. So if you're coming to the table with these kind of boxes checked, then it's going to be hard. It's going to be tougher, but I think there's a lot of positivity to watch as you're forced to do a better job. And hopefully the end results are, you know, you're just as high or if not higher as your competitors in the other spaces.
Yeah.
There will be a trickle down effect naturally as these guys are, you know, getting these negative financial indicators. And of course, race does play into it as well. But I like to think outside of the box and see if there are ways that one can obtain financing outside of those parallels. I'm just dropping a seed.
Yeah.
And I also think that it depends on what part of the sector you're in, right? Because somebody who's an LP has to battle with proving they're not just a commodified item that everybody else has. So how are they going to differentiate themselves is a barrier they need to come to their investors with. Whereas myself, I'm a little bit more differentiated from the get-go, being on the accessory side. So I think also the knockdown effect on that is a bit dependent on where you sit in the cannabis sector as your company.
It also depends on how you position yourself and the marketing and advertising that you do and the following that you gain and all those types of things. There are ways to raise money. And we've seen it all kinds, whether it's through large institutions, whether it's investors, whether it's crowdfunding, which we haven't really explored. And I'm still not sure. I don't know why there isn't a Black or BIPOC crowdfunding group, community, whatever you want to call it, that specific. What's that? Sorry?
I said message.
But it's true. It's not, we can see, I'm going to go back to GameStop. You see where a power can lie. It's there, and there was wealth created, and it didn't take long when people got together as a collective.
So I think one takeaway from that question is look at different opportunities to gain funding and to support these types of industries or opportunities in a very non-traditional way. I've seen crowdfunding work for or being used for even a company that was starting up in Jamaica. So it's out there. We just have to look at the non-traditional ways of making money. So that's a shout out to all the attendees on the call looking for ways to get into the industry or to finance your own project. check out that opportunity as well. So one of the, I think, in my opinion, greatest miss within the Cannabis Act is that there were no considerations for the impact of the war on drugs. The mandate was, let's eliminate the illicit market, but prior to legalization, much of the people that were facing the consequence of that were Black and Indigenous or people of color. Do you think that there are opportunities now, because we've already missed the boat on that, the federal government has missed the boat on that significantly. So are there opportunities now to create some type of economic repair? And if so, what would you suggest, Justin Trudeau and your task force? To Justin Trudeau and his task force.
Drew, you had your hand up.
So, okay. You're absolutely right. They totally messed that up. And, it was a big opportunity missed. I think they recognized it and they've decided to say we're going to give a couple $100 million to Black people now in a business-wide period. And I think, in the same breath, it could be a similar conversation, but there's no government institution solving this problem. And so I think in the near future, the solution is us solving it ourselves. And that's just the unfortunate truth. And to this point, for example, with cannabis amnesty that was brought up before, they do a really good job at helping lower the barriers, or their goal in existence is to lower the barriers for people with simple cannabis convictions in order to have their records expunged. Currently, they're getting them suspended, but there's a big problem with that. You have to pay a bunch of money to get your cannabis charges kicked out. And if you're in jail, you can't get the documents. There's all these barriers that make it very difficult, economic barriers, etc. And then you end up with these companies that want to virtue signal, and they're just saying, hey, I'll give you a check. I'll give you a check. I'll give this check to Cannabis Amnesty. Well, I called Cannabis Amnesty. They have enough checks. What they don't have is proper people getting the jobs done. And so we're working together on something called the Fellowship for Cannabis Amnesty. And I don't want to take too much airtime, but if anybody on this call is interested in helping us get them a director of operations to actually do some good with them and join some fellowship conversations around this issue, then just drop me an email at drew@mytoki.com, or you'll be able to figure it out. But that's the solution I came up with. And we've got some great partners on board, but I don't know where else to get it solved, because I honestly, at this point in time, have just come to the realization that nobody else is coming to our help but us.
Yeah. Definitely second that. There was absolutely a missed opportunity there. And I do agree with Drew that the only people who are going to do it is us. And I just want to let the group and everybody on the panel know that I've been working with Health Canada and 3 other levels of government to see if we can build some type of equity program. Now, we all know about the Black Entrepreneurship program that was launched in November by Justin Trudeau. And yes, I just want to say at the forefront, this is not addressing the individuals who are jailed and criminalized for cannabis use. I still believe that needs to be at the forefront of the conversation always. But after being licensed, there was an influx of people sending me emails and reaching out to me asking, okay, I'm looking for a job. They're not hiring me. I need a way where I can go and do cultivation school, so an educational path. And then alternatively, there's people out there who just want to build their own business. And so Health Canada reached out to actually myself and Keenan and asked if there were any solutions with regards to how we can solve this or how we can work together to actually make something of this. So what I decided to bring to the table is to see if we could essentially merge the Black Entrepreneurship Program with the Cannabis Act. So there's 3 different components. The first component is business support. So you learn about finances, you learn about incorporation, all of those things. And I would like to essentially see Health Canada put the licensing structure and the Navigator program that's given to Indigenous people implemented into that component so that individuals, either Black or persons of color, can actually move forward in this option and get educated on how to get to the next steps through licensing. The second component of it is the funding component. over a 4-year span, there's $241 million that is going to be implemented into this program. Now, I understand that if we're talking big, massive cultivation facilities, big, massive processing facilities, that's not probably going to be feasible. But if we're talking about micro cultivation, micro processing, that can absolutely be feasible if the max that they're going to be giving per business is $250,000. So the third component of this would be data collection, which essentially the Canadian government needs to really understand the needs of entrepreneurs from the Black or persons of color community. Now, with this, I just want to let you know, nothing is set in stone. The government takes a long time to process these things, but thus far we've had a really good support and interest from Health Canada, the feds, and external players like the OCS and the Canadian Council of Cannabis. And so I feel like even though this doesn't address what needs to be addressed from the forefront, which is the criminalization of cannabis use, what this is addressing is the people's need to want to participate in the industry. And as you mentioned, all of you guys mentioned before, the generational wealth aspect, and it will help rebuild Canada's economic future post-COVID. So I'm putting it out there. Like I said, nothing is set in stone, but I do want people to understand that this is not something that is just for harvester, but it should be something for all of us to participate in. And if there is an opportunity where I get, or Michael, my partner, also gets some confirmation from Health Canada that we're moving forward with this, I would love for each and every one of you on the panel and out there to participate, whether it be you're trying to build your own business or whether you want to see this through the policy making phases. The more people, the better. And I think this will really help a lot of individuals who want to participate in this industry.
That's amazing.
That's
I don't know
amazing.
what to say.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I think we're all speechless there, because I would say the one thing I would say is it's about time. Yeah. Right? They are many years too late, but I'm glad they are reaching out now and reaching out to people like you, Ashley and Keenan, who've done it, who know intimately what the process is like and what the costs are like, and can hopefully provide them with the guidance that they need to rectify the missed opportunity with where they started. So this has been amazing. I'm so glad that we got to go so deep into the economic barrier discussion. I'm going to turn to some of the questions that I see within the Q&A. One of the questions is, how much does the lack of marketing and advertising hurt the industry? Do you see it changing in the near future?
I went to Vegas, and when I got off the plane, it was plastered. Go to this dispensary, and I remember I was traveling in the cab with my CEO, and we're like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? I can't believe it was everywhere. Yes, it is going to change. It's if you want to help support this industry, and if you want this industry to grow, you're going to have to advertise, you're going to have to market. And I'm not sure how it's going to be marketed. We can talk rec versus medical and all of those things, but yes, the lack of marketing and advertising educationally, not just, hey, let's do whatever, but in a responsible way, then for sure it's absolutely going to hurt the industry.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those things that's going to be an area that's going to spawn innovation a little bit, because at the end of the day, that one's not necessarily a barrier for an individual or a community, because that one's a carpeted barrier for everybody. And so I think to that point, the way we tackle it, for example, is I hate swag for my company. For my company, investing money in creating products that are going to be effectively in the landfill, as a marketing tool isn't really what I felt I wanted to do as a product designer. And so what we did instead is we put the budget towards an initiative called Local Crafts, where we found this girl, or I guess you could say she found us, but Kay Spence, and a phenomenal 2-time cancer survivor, dancer. And we put the budget towards creating a beautiful piece of content that now can be shared to help demystify and destigmatize cannabis use across the world, which ultimately should help advance marketing becoming more normal place. And I got a phone call over the weekend from a doctor in BC who's a friend of mine saying they were streaming this video at a herbalist conference to show how vape technology is a very clean way to absorb weed and that it just shouldn't be scary to their patients. And then at the end of it, she saw it was our piece, and it just blew my mind that we created something to uplift a Black person and to demystify cannabis. And in the interior of BC, very white community, they are using it to push forward our agenda, but the agenda that we should all have here. And so, yes, it sucks that we can't market. And I think in the terms of demystifying the experience to the general consumer, it also makes it more difficult. But in the meantime, we'll just have to get a bit innovative.
Yeah, I agree. It's so important for advertising to be done in, I have to say, the Canadian way, because when I do go to Vegas, it's a little bit overwhelming. But at the same time, I think there should be some restrictions that are kicked down, especially when it comes to really talking about your product, maybe not on the television screens or billboards, but really have a little bit more access to the end user, especially as a licensed producer. Like, it is difficult to really talk to that end user, because we essentially just need to talk to the bud tenders, and that's not really good. It's going to help us, absolutely, but we really want to make that connection with the end user. So I do believe that Barrington is right. There will be some changes, but in Canada, just looking at what's happening in alcohol and what's happening in the spirits world, it will be quite conservative.
So thank you both. Sorry, Keenan, did you want to add something?
Oh, no, I was just going to say it is slowly changing. Like in Alberta, we work with like AGLC all the time, and our other business was in the cocktail space. So just watching the distilleries, like the small craft distilleries, small breweries, like they're kind of, now AGLC is looking at that model of like, hey, we kind of dropped the ball in cannabis, how can we spin that around? And they're looking to like make it a little bit more like liquor. So I think you're going to start seeing in the next couple of years, the rules are going to get easier. It's going to take time, and to Drew's point, it's going to take innovation. So you got to think ahead of the game right now, but it's not going to be as hard in 3-4 years.
So one of the questions that we have kind of touches on what you were just saying, Keenan, is that are there any predictions of changes in the next 5 years for the cannabis industry?
Yeah, like I'm really excited personally to see what happens with like just CBD being deregulated. I think that's going to blow the market right open if it's more like the US with the Farm Act, and if you can, take wellness products of CBD outside of the dispensaries, that's going to be probably the biggest, most exciting thing that I'm looking forward to, just as someone who consumes especially CBD every day as part of a healthy lifestyle. That's something I'm really excited for.
And I think the final question I'll ask from the Q&A is, how can Black Americans with capital participate and support the cannabis market in Canada?
How do you get over the border?
Yeah, like I was gonna answer that, like send me an email, but I'll leave it to the panel.
Buy stock.
Yeah,
like buy stock. That's if a company's listed, if a U.S. company is listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange, that stock is accessible to everyone in North America. If you want to support, then buy the stock. If you can't travel from one state to the next, and you can't go across the border, that's one way to support the industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Keep your ear to the ground and actually share some of that prize you got. I mean, Jay-Z just started a fund for minority cannabis owners, just evaluate Canadian ideas and US ideas with the same merit, equality of judgment. is I guess how they can help. No. On the what's going to change in the next 5 years, just to throw out my cheat sheet, go to California. There's going to be societal trends that dictate what happens in consumption patterns, and there's going to be technological trends that will dictate consumption patterns from a service side, extraction and of distillates, isolation of CBN, CBD, like Keenan's talking about. But from a societal trend perspective, I think in one of these questions it said the U.S. is 10 years ahead of or where are you 10 years ahead of the U.S.? I woefully disagree. I think California is years ahead of us. And if you want to see where the societal trends are going, go spend a week in California and you'll see what's up.
I think in the next 5 years, to go on top of that, I'm looking at politics, and I'm looking at the neighbor again to the south that, you know, might is right, and they're big. And if it goes, when it goes federally legal, the biggest impact that this industry will ever see isn't banking and isn't legality. It is interstate commerce and travel. And if you can move product from one end of that country right up to the border, it'll turn the whole game on its head, because these companies are set up within their state. They're set up not to do that.
Yeah.
And so now you open those borders and they drop, forget it. It'll change it forever.
So thank you so much. We have 5 minutes left until we get to our next panel discussion. So I wanted to thank everyone, Drew, Keenan, Ashley, and Barrington, for your very thoughtful responses to a very important topic. I would say with the economic barriers is real, and it does impact our ability to fairly participate and compete within this industry. And your guidance, your expertise, and your abilities to have overcome that challenge, I think speaks well to the type of leaders that you are and the great work that I know you'll continue doing. And I'm sure the attendees here hope to see you continue doing and also probably join in those efforts. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else has as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
Great job moderating. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah, here, Vivian.
Thank you guys for that conversation. I got a bunch of messages saying like they were writing down gems and they need the recording immediately. So I thank everyone again. And I'm hoping as well, Ashley, thank you for bringing that up. I'm looking forward to being a part of that in any way possible. So thank you so much. And also, Keenan, I am looking forward for CBD to come on the market as well, because repping right now the company I used to work with in the UK, and we used to sell CBD products, and it has done wonders for myself with fibromyalgia and working and, you know, and having to have that wellness in terms of helping with my anxiety and depression as well. So I'm looking forward to CBD opening up. And also, Drew, it's actually interesting that you brought up the other cannabinoids and, you know, the markets in California, because it's happening in the UK as well as Europe. So thank you so much for that insightful conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing it. So it's been a good 2 hours so far, and as we're entering slowly into the 3rd hour, I wanted to introduce my panel, the next panel, which is Black Women and Intersectionality. I think this panel in itself is such an important one to have. As Black women, you have that identity of, and that intersectionality of being Black and being a woman, and what does that mean and how does that intersect? But in terms of intersectionality as well, you look at the differences in terms of, you look at gender, you look at sexual orientation, you look at disability, you look at so many different aspects that create a unique experience and identity and the ways we navigate spaces, and especially as a woman in terms of gender as well as our race, and even going further in terms of ethnicity and culture. So I want to bring back Vivian to moderate this panel, as she did such an amazing job in the last one. And we look forward to having that conversation of looking at the compounding experiences of Black women and the intersectionality of having to be in the cannabis space that's already so heavily stigmatized, and exploring how they find ways to navigate, what spaces are there that are safe spaces that have been cultivated, and how do we continue to create these spaces. So thank you, Vivian, if you can take it over again. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll reintroduce myself very briefly. My name is Vivian Wilson, the founder and president of Greenport. We're a cannabis company located at cannabis retail store located at 686 College Street in Toronto. And we're also a federally licensed cannabis sale licensed as well. So I really enjoyed that first panel, but for some reason, I'm even more closely connected to this panel for obvious reasons, of course. And I can't, without further ado, I would love to get the panelists to introduce themselves. We can start with Dee. Dee, you're on mute. Sorry, Dee, you're still on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
There you go.
Hi, everyone. All right, 3 times the charm. My name is Danielle Jackson, and I am from Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm proud to be the CEO of my family-owned company, The Vibes, which is a design and consulting company specializing in tourism. I've been involved in the cannabis industry, both legacy and legal, since 2004. Sorry, and as an entertainer and a service provider, and a fairy godmother. That's what I like to think of myself as. And my primary focus is on helping people succeed personally and professionally with cannabis.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Khadija?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hi, I'm Khadija Thornhill, also known as Miss Weed Wiki, and I'm one half of the team that founded the Afro-Canada Bud Sisters a year ago yesterday. It's an online space created first on Facebook, which normalizes cannabis for Black women across Canada. It started as a means to just get together and find other users, but it's also cannabis users, but it's also become a way of empowering our members to learn how to grow the plant, how to roll, how to choose their cannabis, not be as dependent on others as they were prior. Even with legalization and the stigma, it's not readily at everybody's fingertips, and there's knowledge gaps as well. So our group helps to fill that gap, as well as create opportunities for us to congregate together virtually and in person when we're past the pandemic, to enjoy cannabis and to incorporate it and normalize it into our lifestyle, such as the high tea we held last year. We had a garden party and it was entirely cannabis themed and sold out actually within 24 hours. So we're really happy to be able to put a space for Black women to feel comfortable to ask all their questions and to get more familiar with the plant. And in addition to that, I'm a founding member and treasurer of the People's Alliance of Cannabis in Canada, as well as the lead, BIPOC lead for the focus group centered on BIPOC inclusion in cannabis. So that's another group I'm also involved with, as well as education. So it's great to be here, and thank you so much, Vivian, for moderating. It's great to meet you, and thank you, Ika, for arranging all this.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Nicole?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Hines. I am residing in Vancouver, BC, Canada right now. It's super sunny today. I just want to thank everyone for having me. I am a cannabis chef and an educator and founder of a company called Faded Living. I started this company to normalize adult cannabis use through cooking workshops, which I am launching next month. I do have a podcast that comes out every Thursday called Faded Living and Friends, and that's where I chat with people in the cannabis space to show that we're amazing and magical and very, very normal, to again help normalize adult cannabis use. I do some consulting to help those who want to start their journey with cannabis. And then lastly, I'm hoping to bring back infused dining experiences that I started last year called Faded Feast. And once COVID stops doing COVID, I would love to bring that across North America, actually. And then I do some advocacy work as well. I'm also on the BIPOC Advisory Board. I sit with Khadija for PAC. And then I also am a founding member for Louder Together Cannabis Advocacy Society that Miss D also sits on. And we have done some wonderful things there too.
Okay, before I jump into the first question, I mean, I think we could all look at one of the most obvious things is that you all wear a significant amount of hats and are part of a lot of groups. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on this panel, because boy, you're all doing a lot. Just I'm exhausted just listening to what you're doing. Now, I mean, with that said, you all three of you have clearly demonstrated that you're able to build your own and do so much within this industry, as well as continue to advocate for all of us within this industry. Yet we can see that Black women are lacking in a lot of the leadership roles within the cannabis space. I mean, what do you think are some of the contributing reasons, obvious and not so obvious reasons?
I would just want to jump in because I used to work for a cannabis company, a large LP. I used to work for Aurora. And I will say that when you work in the corporate scene, it just goes back to we're just not really heard. You know, we are in these rooms and they're just not really listening to our voices. So what I've done, and I've done this in other industries, not just cannabis, but it's just like something I've experienced in other corporate spaces, is that I realized that I have to create my own space and I have to create my own destiny. And I have to inject myself in spaces where I may be the only one, because what I've learned is that white people will do business with white people very regularly, and they won't necessarily step outside the box to reach somebody who might be BIPOC. And I know now things are shifting over the past, maybe, you know, since 2020, but that really wasn't the case in my experience. So I just made sure that I, you know, kind of got outside of my comfort zone and made sure that I was at least seen, because the more that you're seen, the more that people will eventually start to collaborate with you, and then, you know, you can start building relationships.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Nicole. I do have this adage that I'm starting to use, especially within this cannabis space, is that people need to stop being comfortable with being comfortable and start being comfortable with doing the right thing, right? So Khadija, is there anything that you could lend to that question?
Well, I'd love to build upon that because I learn regularly from Nicole. So I'm glad she touched on everything before I could, you know, take one of her figures of speech. But one of the, they're not necessarily looking for us, it seems. And I haven't been in the cannabis corporate space, so I can't speak anecdotally to it. One of the things I am seeing, though, is in the advocacy and the education spaces, there are a lot of women doing great work and starting organizations to look at ways to normalize the industry as a whole and to set bars, you know, or standards and practices. And you can look at that by looking at the boards of organizations like Education and PAC, which are primarily women. So I think while that table has been kind of closed, the corporate C-suite has been closed off to a lot of us, we're creating spaces in other areas because we are wearing so many hats and we are resourceful.
Dee, would you like to add?
Well, I think that, you know, we pretty much covered it. I mean, you know, they're not, I always laugh when I hear about people saying that, oh, you know, we were looking, but we couldn't find, you know. This is so strange to me because, you know, having been around here with the build up to legalization, you know, knowing that these were the regulations that were coming were only a starting point. They were not the end goal, of course. You know, it's strange to me that people are looking for collaboration and for, you know, networking, but I'm always curious of where they're looking. You know what I mean? So there has been all kinds of movement. 2014, Women Grow was the first professional networking group for the cannabis industry out of Colorado that came to Vancouver and Canada in general, and actually had 6 chapters in Canada. And this is how a lot of the women came together, especially in those major city centers. However, the thing is that, to succeed in the cannabis industry, there's a couple of things that are necessary, like vital, like you cannot succeed without them. And one is collaboration. And, often what we see is a concentration on competition versus that collaboration. And for me, the cannabis industry was so much more than just an industry where women could participate, because I have a background in the gaming industry, the cruise ship industry, and as an entertainer, I've dealt a lot with the reggae industry. So, it's not so much about being a woman as it is about, obviously, from my perspective, being a Black woman amongst, an old, boys club, which is made up of primarily white men. So, like you're saying, that comfort zone is really important when reaching out, because typically what we're seeing is that a lot of reaching out is done within that comfort zone. And so, like the saying goes, doing the same thing over again and expecting a different outcome is the definition of insanity. So what I'm really happy for, what I see this last year or so that I'm super excited about, is all of these minorities, all these BIPOC and Indigenous people coming together and working together to not only support each other, but to collectively have a voice within our cannabis industry.
Now, the one thing that I would add to that is that if they're actually looking, they should have, showed up at my store on the grand opening, because the amount of Black women that showed up, I mean, from Oakville to Niagara Falls to Scarborough, was during a pandemic, was absolutely amazing. And that really opened my eyes to the fact that they're missing the mark. They're absolutely missing the mark. They're not looking where they need to look. And well, businesses like ours need to monopolize on that, right? And take advantage of what it is they're not seeing. So that's a huge opportunity as well, I think, for any of the attendees listening, that there's markets that are not being paid attention to, and we have an opportunity there.
I'd love to weigh in just a quick moment, though.
Yeah.
I don't think we should overlook the impact of geography. The Black community in Canada is impacted by the fact that we are so spread out, and it creates a different experience. When you're Black in the Maritimes, you have a different lived experience and a different community engagement level and reach, in the different communities, whether you're Black and English speaking in Montreal versus Black and French speaking in Montreal. And then you have Toronto, and then you have, out west in Vancouver. The communicating to the community can't be static, because we are not monolithic. And you got to be able and agile to go and find us where we are as well, and be willing to.
Excellent point. Thank you so much. So I know that many of you, all of you on the panel, have basically carved out your own spaces in the industry. And so thank you very much for doing that, because that means that you are, the leaders that we need to see. But is that your responsibility, and to have carved out your own space? And how did you manage to do it, considering all of the other noises out there? How did you manage to create your own space?
I'll just speak on that real quick. I think for me, I've ran another business before. I used to run like a Jamaican fusion food business in Calgary called Womxn. So I was in an indoor farmers market, very white population, I was engaging in just like a market that the Caribbeans in that city didn't really target, right? Like they kind of targeted their own community. And I think partly for me, it's because I'm Canadian born, I think. I think that I have a little bit of a different perspective on things. So I know a lot of things that I've done, I've been the first to do it. So for me, it's kind of just been ingrained in me to kind of just do that. And when you build your self-esteem up and you love yourself, I'm like, well, I love what I do. You know what I mean? And, you know, some people end up following and loving what I do. So that kind of gives me the courage to carry on. And I really encourage people to sort of do that. And just, I know it feels, it isn't, it's a hard to kind of carry that weight. But at the same time, I think that it's really needed, because if we don't do it, if some of us don't make that step, then there's, you know, it's harder for other that are younger than us, you know what I mean? Or even just in positions where they're considering a life change, to actually think that it could be viable. So that's why I think it's important for, like, if you have the ability and you have the energy and you have the drive to do that, and to kind of help set that, you know, help kind of motivate others. So that's, yeah.
I would say that, you know, mentorship is incredibly important. 17 years ago, when I dedicated myself exclusively to the cannabis industry, there were no mentors for me. My mentors, there are women mentors for me in my location, right? For what I wanted to do, which was really learn about business. And so, you know, mentorship is incredibly important. And I think that no matter what stage we are at in our own success, it's so incredibly important to pay that forward, to help others, right? To share that success, because in my opinion, you know, I feel successful, but success is only best enjoyed when it's shared with others, right? So we have to do this together. Nobody, no one, not a man, not a white man, nobody succeeds in the cannabis industry alone. So we have to help each other. Like, and so no matter how much we don't want to do that, you know, we have to. That's the only way we can succeed. And so establishing and being discerning in relationships is incredibly important. You know, often people, you know, birds of a feather flock together. That's what people perceive. And so, you know, you're constantly, as an entrepreneur in the cannabis industry, especially as a Black or person of color, you are going to have to prove yourself. Nobody is going to take your word for nothing. So, you know, and you're going to have to continuously do that. The bonus is that you're also going to be completely underestimated. And so you can use that to your advantage. So, you know, and the thing about it is, honestly, being an entrepreneur is really challenging, period, whoever you are. To build and run and manage a successful, sustainable business is incredibly hard. And so often when people are thinking about entrepreneurship, they don't often have a very realistic view of what that entails, right? Particularly when it comes to economic security, especially in the beginning, the ability, the need to, in our industry specifically, to be able to pivot. Right? We've undergone many changes since legalization, and we will undergo many, many more. So if you are rigid in your thinking and approach, then you are self-sabotaging. So, you know, like, I think that it is our responsibility, because nobody's going to do it for us, and nobody's going to give us something for nothing. There is always a cost to it. And so I always encourage people to look at that fine print, whatever that is, and ensure that they are willing to you know, pay that cost of whatever it is. You know, because honestly, if you are an entrepreneur and you are coming into the industry thinking that, you know, you're going to build a successful business in a year that's going to be super lucrative, that is kind of unrealistic. And so there's a commitment that comes to that entrepreneurship. And so the better or the more help that you can find to support that, the easier and the quicker it will happen.
Great. Go ahead, Khadijah, if you want to add.
Hi. I would also say too that I agree with everything everybody's saying. Also, though, looking at ways to incorporate whatever skills you have from your past life. Okay, coming into an emerging industry like the cannabis industry doesn't mean you suddenly have to forget everything you did, whether it was for a 10-year-long working career, a 5-year-long, or in my case, 23 years in my industry. There's skills that are still required in the cannabis space as well that you can transfer. So looking to be agile and adapting your existing and looking at your transferable skills, that's up to you too. People are not going to look at you and ask you what you can bring to the table. You've got to decide what you can transfer as well for yourself and how, and what you are weak at, where you can get that filled in elsewhere through collaboration, through outsourcing, things like that.
I think those are all excellent points. And I think one of the things that I would add is that where being Black, being female, and trying to be an entrepreneur within a cannabis space, where there's a lot of stereotype about, Jamaicans within this entire cannabis war on drugs. It's how do you make all of those that are supposed to be disadvantages, advantages? And I think this is one of those industries that actually allows us to do that, right? So for example, I see when I go to Jamaica, for example, to learn about the industry and what's going on there, that I'm actually well received because they're seeing someone that reminds them of, home, right? Of a mother, a sister, what have you. I'm far less threatening in that type of environment than a man would be, because they're not going to think I'm going to come and, steal their crops or what have you. And that's the reality of the situation. And here in Canada, one of the things that I would say is that a lot of the people that are close to me now that I work with or collaborate with in the industry are approaching me in such a respectful way that it really narrows down who you work with very quickly. Very quickly. There are those who are coming in very disrespectful ways, and it's so well pronounced, right? So whatever were disadvantages in other industries, I think could be advantages in this industry as well. So to get to the point of economic barriers and gaining access to that, have any of you on the panel experience some economic barriers with getting your entrepreneurial pursuits off the ground, and how did you deal with that? How did you overcome it?
For sure. Sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
I'll just go real quick. For me, when I started this business, and it's still brand spanking new, I wasn't looking for any financing. I was just looking for a bank account. So that I can collect my revenue. And that was a challenge. And that was not something that I had actually anticipated. I had ran a business before. In that former life, I was a sole proprietor, and it was very easy to get a bank account. I didn't really have to do much. However, on the flip side now, now I am incorporated. So I just figured, I feel even more legit, and I thought that I would easily just contact, Van City. I knew enough to know that I wasn't going to go with the large banks at first. And I just thought I was going to contact Van City and that was going to be great. And that was not the case. The minute that they heard cannabis, they said no. And they didn't even know if I was Black, white, Indigenous, Asian. That was not the issue. The issue was cannabis. So that's when I realized, not only is there that barrier of being Black, being a woman, but then you also have the fact that there is that stigma around cannabis, and there are a lot of barriers just to get, banking and financial support that way. So what I learned is that, if you are, have a long history with your bank, even if it is a large, one of the large banks, I still recommend that you try them first, you know what I mean? Because they may be able to support you because you may have products with them. I happen to bank forever with Scotiabank, who has clearly stated that they do not do business with cannabis. So therefore I was brand spanking new all around. If you are in Ontario, there is Alterna Savings that you could try, but it was going to be an expensive endeavor for somebody who lived in BC. That there's just a lot of other things that I would have had to do, and especially with it being COVID and such like that, that my fees just to open up the account could have cost me just under $3,000. Or you can make a list of all the credit unions in your area, and you can create a lovely package that might include your, business plan, maybe a resume, you might have a company profile, all of those things, and literally reach out to each and every one of them. And you will discover that one of those credit unions in your area will say yes. And my cost to open up an account in Vancouver with a credit union cost me a $5 membership fee. So that is my tip for the day.
Either Dee or Khadija, anything else to add?
I have had pretty smooth sailing, but I'm not touching the plant with our business quite yet. So I'll defer to Dee, definitely, who will have more insights.
Well, I was going to say that, there's no way years ago I would have said to the bank, hey, I'm a cannabis entrepreneur. So, the thing about it is in cannabis, what I have found to be successful for me is to really be creative, to really think outside the box in terms of understanding, first of all, that we are ambassadors of the plant. No matter whether we want to be or not, as soon as we walk in there and we mention the word cannabis, we are ambassadors of the plant. How they view us is how they're going to view cannabis often. So that's really important because, I like to do what I like to do, but, when I'm speaking to these entities that I need something from, like, I'm going to speak to them in a language that they understand. So I'm not going to go in there and talk about, my vision and my culture and all this kind of stuff. I'm going to talk to them in numbers and in practical, strategies. So presentation, and for me, what I did in the beginning, and I do bank with one of the big banks, and I've been blessed to establish a relationship with them over the years that, now when I need something, they're kind of welcome my call, you know what I mean? But the thing is, for me as a young woman, I'm now in my mid-50s, so I've had like a lot of time to work on some stuff. But when I was a young woman, I had terrible credit worthiness, right? I had terrible credit worthiness. And I didn't, in the legacy market, it wasn't as important, but moving into the legal market was really important. So I actually spent 18 months sorting my stuff out, taking care, raising, not only correcting my credit, but actually building a good credit record. And I can't stress enough how important that is. We can't just expect that, just because, this is a lucrative industry, or just because, we're doing a trending idea, that doesn't mean anything, because ultimately, whether it's a bank or whether it's an angel investor or whether it's, investment group, they're really investing in you, right? Right? And your idea. But the thing is that, so like I said, for me, the focus, the biggest investment I've ever made in cannabis has been into myself in terms of education, in terms of preparing myself for success, right? Because it doesn't just happen, and we have all these barriers already that we can't do anything about. So trying to do the things that we can do about the barriers that we have that can prevent us from succeeding.
I was on mute. One of the things that I know that I did with opening up a bank account. So for many of you on the call, you may not know that even though cannabis is federally legal in Canada, most of the major banks will not open cannabis bank accounts. The reason behind it is that it may interfere with their American businesses that they're doing. So they will not touch it. The one major bank that I know that does it, so that's BMO. they do charge around $5,000 just to review your application. And even if you're not approved, you do not get that money back, right? You do not get that $5,000 back because that's their money for taking the time to review your application. The one bank that does do it here in Ontario is Alterna, like Nicole mentioned. Alterna, when I was starting out, was free, except for that, you know, that $5 fee, what have you, that they charge. Now they definitely charge around $1,500 to $2,000. But my advice to you is ask them to remove that fee. You don't go in and talk to any regular person. You can escalate that request, because I had that done and that fee was reduced dramatically, or you can have it eliminated. So ask the question of how you can get that fee eliminated, because a lot of these banks are trying to show their commitment to BIPOC communities and supporting their businesses. So that's an angle, that's an approach that you can take, because they're saying that they want to do this work. Show them here's an opportunity for you to do that work. So I can tell you I did that, and that amount of that to open an account was actually reduced. So that's my little tidbit of information for you. The other question then I'll jump into is for any of the other women on the call right now, looking and trying to figure out, how do I even get started? This industry seems like it's changing, like you need a ton of money to get in it. So can you share with them any advice on how they can get something started? Just even foundational advice on how to get their business started.
I think Khadijah talked a little bit earlier about, like, you know, if you are, like, you got to think of, like, if you're, everything that's in the cannabis industry, even corporate wise, there is an equivalent in, I call, like, the regular world, right? So if you're an accountant in the regular world, you can be accountant in the cannabis world. If you're accountant, you know what I mean? Like, if you are in HR in the regular world, you can actually be HR in the cannabis world. So that's one of the easiest ways to kind of transition. If you love the plant and you want to get involved, I think that, you know, I would look up cannabis companies and try to get in based on the credentials that you already have. One thing that I did notice when I left Aurora is that, especially a lot of these, and I'm assuming it's pretty similar across the board, but because a lot of these corporations have done a lot of layoffs in 2020, you'll notice that the culture of the company has shifted, and it is more corporate than it is culture. So therefore, you have a lot of people that work there, a high percentage that don't know the plant, they don't use it, they don't have any connection to it at all, right? So that's, if you are somebody who loves the plant, are a cannabis consumer, I find that that's one of the easiest ways to get in. The other thing is, like, I want to be honest with you, it is expensive. If you've ran a business in any other industry, I was in the food industry, which is expensive because, you know, commercial equipment is very, very pricey. It is still something to be conscious of, because just to give an example, you know, and it also depends on where you live, but like a prime example, in Vancouver, the business license for operating a dispensary is little over $33,000. If you're in Calgary, it's $387. So just so that you know that there's all these disparities depending on where you live, I think, you know, like, it's something to be aware of, because I don't think if somebody was formally running, like, let's say a clothing store, may expect to see those types of fees when they're trying to get into the cannabis industry. So in my just advice is just to let you know that it can be pricey. That's why I did, you know, reference the fact that, like, yeah, there is BMO that may allow you to, you referenced it, sorry, but that BMO, you know, may open an account for you, but it is like, could be $5,000 to $7,000. And they may have ran like a restaurant before, whatever, like multiple businesses, and never paid that type of a fee. So that's, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, it is, you know, we have the barrier because we are, again, Black, female, and, you know, a lot of times you don't have access, or our families don't have access to that kind of capital and money, but it's just something to be aware. I would never want you to enter the industry thinking that it's going to be similar to maybe a business that you've ran before.
I would even, yeah, to build on what Nicole's saying, I would recommend mentorship. If you can find someone who's already doing what you're doing, interested in doing, try to connect, try to network with them, network with intention. So, you know, like sometimes when I work and network, it'd be because you're doing the appreciation parties and industry stuff for the freeness. Network because you want to, you know, work with that company, or there's people that you know in that segment that are going to be at this event, and make yourself there. That's a great way to look at how to get into this industry. I'd also say take a look, if you have no idea what you want to do, but you want to work with the plant, or you're interested in the plant, take a look at some of the education programs out there. When I started Afro-Canada Bud Sisters last year, we had no clue it was going to grow the way it did. And I still wasn't sure what we were going to do, because an event company is great, but we're still in the middle of a pandemic. I actually only started to crystallize my plans when I took a program out of Durham College, which was a cannabis certificate program for individuals looking to come in from other industries. And it gave you like a 5-course overview of the industry, and lets you decide from that if you want to go into cultivation. These are, you know, things you kind of need to know. If you want to go into advertising or ethics in law, you know, think of cannabis law, things, it just gave a great overview. And from there, it gave me a direction to start focusing. It also provided an opportunity to network with the instructors, who often are people that are working in the cannabis industry already. So I'd recommend trying that as well. Niagara College has a program, McMaster University, Durham College. I believe Seneca just started one as well. So just look across the country, because I think more and more are popping up.
I might add too, like, you know, my biggest advice to women that come into our industry has been and is always do what you love. This can be a grueling thing if you're not loving what you do. And so, you know, we often, when we're talking about the industry, this has happened at conferences, and often happens where when we speak about the industry and opportunities, we think so linearly, sorry. You know, we think about production, cultivation, we think about manufacturing, and then we think about retail, and like that's the industry. And the industry is so much more than that. And so, for example, you know, the reason I work in Canada tourism is because my background, since I left home when back in '79, I like to travel. I'm an adventurer and an explorer, and I love cannabis, and I love to seek out the community of cannabis, right? The culture of it. And that led me into, as an adult, I went to work in tourism, and then went to work at sea, managing casinos on luxury cruise ships. So like I bring that love of travel, and my whole goal over the last, you know, 16 years or so has been to incorporate all the things that I love into one business, so that I can do what I love, so I don't need to think about retiring. You know, and that is so incredibly important, because even on those hard days, and when those disappointments and those things happen that are even devastating, like, you know, the pandemic has been devastating for all tourism, and Canada tourism as well. So, you know, we keep our heads up, because we have faith that travel and tourism will rebound. Hopefully we can hang in there with our businesses. But the thing is, even on the worst days, when you're doing something you love, you can deal with it. It's okay, you know, and understanding that truly all business in the cannabis industry that is focused on the community and the culture of cannabis, this is so important, because it is the culture and the community of cannabis that steers our industry. It's not the other way around. So, you know, we have a voice, and those people that create those platforms for our community to share, whether we're entrepreneurs, whether we're simply enthusiasts, right? For me, I work with businesses and travelers, so I love to combine that as well. It's not an us and them kind of thing. We all appreciate and respect cannabis, and we all love to travel. So, you know, yeah, I just think that if you're thinking about entering the industry, the most valuable suggestion I could give you is to really take your time, really explore the industry, really see what tweaks your interest and where things are going, and think creatively. Don't think about, you know, this is not like a standard, okay, I need this, you know. You know, you do need some of those things like a business plan, and chances are, I know from experience that many people don't really know how to write a business plan. So if you don't know how, you got to know what you don't know, right? And so that you can reach out and collaborate and network with those people. But take your time, be discerning, and choose something that you love. Work in what you love, because life is too short not to.
So I would definitely echo what all the panelists are saying. I mean, I think this is one of the most welcoming industries that I've been in. And I've been in healthcare and in real estate. And I definitely, that whole community aspect, there's a greater voice, I would say, in this industry about it being about the plant community than any other industry that I can see. And I think that access to collaboration and networking is far more open in this industry than anything else. No one is closing the doors to anything at this point in time, because this is such a new and growing industry that there's just so many opportunities that even as a business owner, you don't want to close the door to someone approaching you about an idea that could become the next big thing. So a lot of business owners, a lot of the LPs are really open to new ideas. And so take that opportunity. It's not, there are plenty of people that reach out to me to collaborate. And I know, you know, from previous experience that it can be intimidating, thinking like, oh, I'm going to waste this person's time, or they're not even going to answer me. But really, the worst thing they can do is not, you know, if they don't answer you, then you move on to the next person. Somebody is for sure going to answer you if you're looking for any information or advice and what have you. So definitely echo what the panel is saying, reach out, network, collaborate. That's the best way to get to know the industry, get to know people, and just build that community base even before you get started on any of the ideas that you want to get started on within the industry. So if we're moving on to the next question, I know, Dee, you had touched on the importance of community building within the cannabis space. And I think all of you are doing your own work in achieving that. How successful is that idea, and what does that look like about, you know, community-led initiatives, programs, and led predominantly by Black women? Like, how do we make that happen, and what does that look like to each of you?
Well, I think we're making it happen, just even in this situation today. I did want to add, like, just to finalize that previous question, I did want to add that, you know, you really don't need gazillions of dollars to start a cannabis business. It's only when you're thinking in terms of what is a cannabis business. So that's why I encourage you to think outside that box and be creative and understand all the different things, because all the different opportunities, because those opportunities, the cannabis industry is as diverse as the community, which is as diverse as the cultivars of the plant itself. So we have to expand our consciousness, and cannabis can help us do that. Expand our consciousness to understand that there are lots of viable, successful businesses that can be started for very little. And so, you know, community building is one of those things, right? You know, really, if you can create platforms for the community to come together and those different factions of the community, because it's important to remember that we are diverse. There is no one size fits all with cannabis, not in the plant and not in the art industry. And so, you know, community building is critical. It's critical because navigating the cannabis industry is an incredible challenge. It's so hard, like with our ever-changing regulations, and you know, some of the people, like, let's be real here, some of the people that we have to deal with, our best interest is not in their priority, right? And so, you know, there is exploitation and there is tokenism and there is those things. And so, you know, we can start small. We don't have to go from 0 to 100 miles per hour. You know, you don't have to think either I'm an entrepreneur and I want to start a business and I want to start, you know, up here. No, you can start like just taking one step. You can start with a website. That's how I started as a consultant. I just kind of put up a website sharing a little bit about what I did. And that, you know, word of mouth has been and will always be one of the most valuable networks in our industry. So cultivate it. And don't, you know, I really recommend that you don't think that there are other priorities, because your success in this industry hinges on your relationships.
I mean, even just this panel and diversity talk, that really is the epitome of community-led opportunities and initiatives. So we got to thank ICA for showing us that it can be done, and it's definitely a real resource. It's a real opportunity. And Khadija, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, the community building aspect, especially with Black women, was something I started learning how to do when I was actually an admin and moderator for another group, which was basically Black moms worldwide. And that group's got 17,000 people. And it started, you know, 5 years ago. So from other groups on online spaces was when I started to actually appreciate the value of the dialogues exchanged. And then you have it, you know, an app like Facebook that has evolved and spun into so many ways we can connect and interact and engage, that when you learn how to leverage that and you learn how to feed, you know, and service your base. Our community was created because there wasn't any out there. I had already been in other ones. Like I was in a US version of my group for Black moms, and there was nothing relatable. So very limited dialogue and posts were relatable. So for us, we were building what was not already out there. And that's how it was able to grow. And I think that because our cannabis education and advertising gets attacked and vilified so regularly, these communities, especially private groups, are so intrinsic into the growth of the cannabis culture to people who aren't as comfortable talking about it. Because this is how, you know, groups like this is how they get in, they sit, they monitor from the corners and in the quiet spots. Some of them never even will touch the plant, but they'll grow it for friends. They, you know, and they get more comfortable from being in spaces where they feel welcome. So that's what community building has shown me. And when you have a community full of so many different people from across the country, they're also talking about you in their spaces. And that's how, you know, we end up networking and being on other people's podcasts, sitting in on discussions about mental health and the Black community and other things. Like it opens up a world too, but you got to put your feelers out there and be open to receiving.
And then I just wanted to end, Vivian, you made a comment about like how open and like friendly and this industry really is. And I have to like really like hands down, that is the truth, at least from my experience. I met Ms. D when I first moved to Vancouver. I was looking to get into the cannabis space, and I actually connected with the former Women Grow chapter leader who no longer lived in Vancouver. And she recommended that I reach out to Ms. D, and Ms. D met me. She was moving to back to Vancouver. I was moving to Vancouver. We met literally, I think we were in the city for 2 weeks or something like that. We met, and she took me under her wing. She introduced me to all her people, and I was like hanging out with her all the time. And so I you know, even with my podcast, like all of my, like I know all my, like it's Fade Living and Friends, because Vancouver has been at least the way it was before COVID, let's say, the culture and the events and the womanhood that was in that is in this city, in this, you know, cannabis community is phenomenal. And the amount of collaborations that I've done within this community amongst women, a diverse group of women, is phenomenal. So I just encourage that if in your space you don't have it, don't be afraid to start it. Because you'll be surprised as to how many women are actually undercover consumers, right? Like, so that's, yeah.
The undercover consumer part is very real. It's very real, and sometimes you just have to ask the question, and you'll get the answer. So this does bring us to one of the questions in the Q&A chat. For colored women from Alberta, are there any resources, groups, or guidance that you can shine? And what does that look like or consider?
Well, I'm just gonna give a shout out to the Symposia Women Group. They are based out of Calgary and area. Nancy Ann Rose and Thelia Foster are the founders of this group. I have done amazing things. Miss Dia has done amazing things with this group. They are magical people. And I would recommend, because you're in that area, they will connect you with a lot of people within a lot of women in the cannabis space in and around Alberta. So that is one of the groups that I would recommend. They're on Facebook, and it's called Symposia Women Group. So that is a group that I would recommend.
I think that's something we can share in the chat after as well, to make sure that everyone that attended has that information. So I think, so with, just to add on to that, sorry, did anyone else want to add on to how women in Alberta can find resources to get their business started?
Well, normally I would say attend events, but of course we're going
Yeah.
to attend. So, but actually it's true. So
Yeah.
attend the online events, attend the
Yeah.
online events. You're going to connect, with people. And to be honest, you know, coming from before the internet, this is such a magical tool to be able to connect us no matter how isolated we feel, no matter whether we know someone in our town or in our, you know, province even, we can connect online. And the other thing I would add to that briefly is that, you know, you have to ask for what you need. You have to be able to say what you need. If you want to connect with people in Calgary, tell everybody you come across, no matter where they are, that you want to connect with people in Calgary or whatever, right? You have to put yourself out there, and that's part of it, is about expressing your needs, saying what you want, what you're looking for. I do that, especially if I want to create, you know, a new project or something. I just start telling certain people, and I know that they're going to tell other people, and that's how you broaden your you know, circle, right? So yeah, speak up.
And what I would add is, don't limit it to the areas that you're in, right? The city or province or country. The best learnings that I've had were from my connections in Jamaica to Arizona. And they didn't know about the Canadian climate, but they had been in the cannabis space in their respective countries, and they were still able to share knowledge about the industry, because there's certain things that are still very, very similar across borders. And so it's finding that connection wherever you can find it. And a lot of the connections, believe it or not, that I made within Canada was because the person, Ross Ivy, I'll shout him out always, in Jamaica, connected me through his connections to people in Canada. And so you never know who will be the one to connect you. They don't necessarily have to be in Alberta. And that's how I met when I was initially getting started, met a lot of the cannabis players here in Canada.
I'd also recommend keeping your eyes out for new tech. The Clubhouse app has been remarkable in terms of having great conversations about the cannabis space, both in the US and in Canada. And, you know, every few days when I'm on there, I'm networking with someone new. Nicole will tell you, we run 2 groups weekly on the Clubhouse app, including a BIPOC connections networking event every Friday at 4 p.m. And just yesterday, when we were in there in our Canna Queens Straighten Your Crown group, we met a bud tender from the Micmac territory in New Brunswick, like just randomly through Clubhouse. And our room wasn't even that big. But when you are putting something out there that people want to learn about, they'll find you. That's what I'm learning. And there's enough out there for all of us.
So we're almost at the end of this panel discussion. Thank you all very much for sharing with us your insights, experiences, lessons learned, community building, and talking about the multiple hats that you're wearing. Before we end, I just wanted to know, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to add? Are there any things that you're like, you know what, it wasn't covered in the initial questions, but if I only knew this before, I think it may have been easier for me now?
I would say the only other thing I wanted to maybe touch on, and stoner brain made me forget a bit, was we can't also, we have to also maybe acknowledge that the plant, even within our community, has been tied a lot to men. So when we create women-only spaces, before 3-4 years ago, and on the approach of legalization, I only got cannabis from males I encountered, either through my barber or someone I dated. And even in our group, you'll meet women who will be like, oh, I've broken up with my boyfriend, I don't even know how to go out and get cannabis from the local store, because they just never thought about it that way. So teaching sustainability as well as education to people, teaching people how to grow their own medicine, their own plant, is also an opportunity we can emphasize for everyone in our community as well. And that empowering of women.
Nicole?
Yeah, that I totally agree with that. I think it's just don't forget Google is your friend. I swear, I have found so many things through Google. Ask the questions, you will be connected. You will be shocked, right? And with what Ms. D said, if you are doing what you absolutely love, the hurdles that you may experience in this industry won't be so hard to bear.
Excellent. There's one question in the chat. LLP, is there an LLP in Canada? Do any of you know what LLP is?
LLPs I've dealt with are law firms. In my space, they're law firms. I don't know if he's meant an LLC, which are usually incorporations in the States.
Maybe. I did ask for a clarification question on that. So if you could just answer that question, if you want us to answer the question, could you please clarify what LLP is?
I will say if they're referring to like an actual lawyer, I will say this, that in Vancouver area, I was able to be a recipient of a program that DLA Piper puts out. They do help entrepreneurs with their legal needs for free, pro bono, and it is for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, a program that they have, and there is an application to do, but it's really very simple. So that is, and they deal with a lot of cannabis and psychedelic companies, so they're very welcoming. So if that's the question, DLA Piper out of the Vancouver branch, they do have a program, so you can always look them up and get that support.
They clarified it was limited partnership for cannabis.
No, it's limited legal partnerships. It's whether it's cannabis or accounting or law, it can be, it's a type of business format, sorry.
Okay, excellent. Aika, I can see you're back. Sorry, Misty, I know you had dropped off very briefly. And before we close, definitely if you wanted to add, are there any final thoughts that you could add to the discussion? Just if you could do something different, if you knew this information now that you didn't know, 4 years from now when getting in the space, what would it be to make things much easier for you?
Wow, good question. I wouldn't waste my time with people that weren't serious, that were simply kind of curious instead of serious. I wouldn't waste my time doing that because, and I'd also keep things a lot closer to my vest, which is what I do now. You know, I know that a lot of people have not experienced, you know, people, you know, taking their ideas and stuff like that. But as an innovator, that's going to happen. And so one thing is I keep things closer to my vest now that I don't want other people to know. But the other part about that is, you know, sometimes the only thing we can change is our perspective, right? How we approach, how we perceive things. And so these days, I wish that I had knew back then that I was actually just, I could look at myself just as an inspiration, right? So whenever I do stuff, I think about that. I think about, gee, I wonder if this will inspire somebody to do something similar in their own way. And that is really accepting that we don't need to worry about competition because if we're just doing our best, what we're doing, then we have to be judged on the merits of that. And yeah, you know, working together is just so much easier. I wish I'd known more about that earlier on, but fortunately, I'm surrounded by amazing people. And I know that, you know, if I just keep my door open or my phone line open, I meet the most incredible people. And to be honest, the last thing I would say is that I have found from my own personal perspective that investing in the success of others is the best way to ensure your own success.
Well said. I think that's a great ending point to end the discussion. Back to you, Aika.
So thank you. Lots of gems. I actually wrote down so many things. Every time I'm speaking to you ladies or I see your tweets or something on social media, I am always inspired. And I think that one of the hardest things is sometimes being so discouraged, sometimes when you don't feel as if your message is reaching anybody, but indeed, sometimes it actually is. And I think throughout this entire event, just having you guys as speakers, as people that have reached out to me, that have wanted to be a part of what I'm doing is it's so overwhelming and it's emotional, but Bigoman, don't cry. That's my little patois for today. So, you know, I'm holding it down. So, you know, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I thank all the attendees and everyone who stick around to listen to these wonderful individuals who have been trailblazing and have been so inspirational. And I will be connecting with you guys with all the attendees and sharing everyone's ats, and please just get connected. We're one of those people, and I think everybody that was a part of this is one of those people that we want to reach out, we want to help where we can, and if we don't know the answers, we will try to find the answers and connect you with the right people. And as you can see, we're doing so many diverse things in the community, we're doing so many different things in so many different sectors within cannabis, but it all boils down to that one plant connecting us. And I think that, you know, moving forward, if you have questions, please reach out to us. Again, we'll be reaching out in terms of giving the ads of everyone who's here. We will continue to be doing events. We'll be continuing to share information and resources. We'll be continuing to build those collaborations. And if you do want to collaborate and partner with anything, please reach out to us and reach out to me as well. So with that being said, you know, thank you again for everyone attending. The session is recorded as well. And I just wanted to give a big shout out to Damini, who from Toki as well. Toki has been one of my biggest supporters in the beginning of everything that I wanted to do. So thank you, Drew and his team, so much for always being there to support and offering a hand. Please reach out to them. So as I close this, recordings will be sent, and thank you everyone, and have a wonderful night, and go eat dinner because I'm hungry too. So thank you everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.